conventional loan, if you have an appraisal done, a lot of that stuff's just cosmetic, like torn carpet, chipped paint. Just a lot of weird stuff. We had one last week where the carpet needed to be stretched, so they said that had to be fixed before they could close that chain. And it depends on the inspector. Every inspector
different.
treats. I buy a house, a short sale up in Ellington right now, and it's got carpet that needs to be stretched. And we're getting that VJ loan on it, and they didn't say boo about that. So it just depends who shows up. Right?
Well, it's likely you're gonna tear up the carpet anyway, and you still have to have it stretched.
Yeah, it's truthfully. I mean, when I sold a house one time, I bought a house, VA, Kansas City, my very first house. It was probably like $35,000. We assumed the guy's VA mortgage. And when we bought it, everything apparently was okay. And then when we sold it with a VA assumption too. And the guy that came out and inspected the appraisal on that one determined that when the addition had been built off the back of the house, which was done before we bought it, the dirt hadn't been smoothed out enough to give enough clearance between the ground and the floor joists. So my wife and I are on our bellies with rakes, raking out the dirt underneath the crawl space.
Wow.
And then there was a sidewalk that had settled in front of the house, like kind of slant towards the house. But there was a garden there, and then you stepped up onto a porch, get into the house, and they wanted that sidewalk leveled off. So, you know, it's expensive to like jack mud under, stuff like that. So the handyman just put a skim coat of like
over it.
Concrete mix on top of it. In Kansas City, first winter storm,
Mm-hmm.
you only shovel the snow, you're gonna bust it all off. It was stupid. But the house got sold, so we were happy. So you guys all know kind of we're preparing for this new command and everything. So we're going to be converting over from .loop to DocuSign, and then DocuSign, Keller Williams component of that will have all our documents and everything built into it. So like the .loop that we're all have become used to is going to be kind of going away, unless you want, if you want to sign up for your own private version of .loop, you have the ability to do that. That's not what we're really recommending. I know a few agents have, just because they don't want to deal with the worry that they won't be able to get into something right away, but we've been told that we'll have access to everything that is in .loop, so we shouldn't have to worry about that. It's just a matter of, you know, we're going to be learning a new system. So let me see if I can remember my password.
Isn't there a webinar going on that?
On DocuSign?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be doing more training on it.
I thought I saw something come out today that there was going to be a webinar on it. Was that going to be tomorrow, or has anybody seen it?
They have a little YouTube blurb on it. It's real simple. I haven't done it yet, but a few agents
No, this is
have.
something that just came out today.
Yeah, I just,
To look at it online before you signed up for the.
yeah, I think it was, David shared it.
Yeah, if you do have a chance to get on that webinar, it'd probably be a good idea, because honestly, we don't really know that much about it yet either. It's just kind of scary because it goes live, I think, September 15th.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
There's, Kelly shared on the Keller Williams Peace River Partners Insiders group. There is a video you need to watch before the live stream tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Okay, so you guys all know what you're talking about. Jolene, you're probably the newest.
Excuse me,
in the room,
4
I
p.m.
think.
Sorry, 4 p.m.
So,
Is everybody
4
going to that
p.m.
Facebook
Eastern
group?
are you able to get into your Keller Williams stuff?
Not yet, I'm still waiting to get the email from the tech people that it's up and running.
Okay. Well, we can run it in the training room too.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to share your personal email with me or John here, we're on career development. We'll share you like the Facebook page and all that kind of stuff, so you're getting the updates and stuff that you can get into.
Okay.
Okay.
No YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks for that,
in
Jim.
preparation for the conversion, we've been working on some things, and one of those things should be this and you don't all have it yet because we're making copies, but there's seller and buyer disclosure. We'll make sure you all have it. This is just a draft that Brett's been working on, actually. And the intent of this was, you ever see the companies that have these customer disclosures? So who needs one of these seller disclosures? Oh.
I made 15.
Oh, good, good. Thank you. So, you know, a lot of companies have like standard disclosures that they get their customers to sign. We're working towards that. Although one of the my pet peeves.
Jolene.
Hi, Jolyn, Lorelei.
Jolene
Jolene, everybody.
works with
Hi, Jolene.
Leslie Bolt.
Ah, okay.
So,
I love Leslie.
you know, some of the, I don't know if you've done the deal with Michael Saunders, it's probably the best example. They have disclosures for everything. I mean, they'll make their agents put a lead-based paint disclosure on a house that's built in 1984, you know, that's not even required, but because they don't, I guess they don't
They don't wanna be sued.
respect their agent's ability to discern whether or not something needs a lead-based paint disclosure or not.
They don't
to me.
discriminate, everybody gets it.
Okay, next. Comprehensive.
Yeah, so there's also
FHA.
FHA, VA, appraisal addendum.
Comprehensive right
Cut
on.
off words and
I'm just gonna assume you.
I do.
So, anyway, this disclosure document is something that was, like I said, Brett's working on, it's not finished yet. So this is the first time I've seen it, okay? But I thought it would be a good idea maybe to get some feedback from you guys, find out. One of the things I don't like about this document is it reiterates a lot of the same stuff that's in the contract already.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know, to me, that's just,
Summarizing.
I think that's maybe might be more confusing for the agents and the customers than not disclosing something that's already stated in the contract. I mean, would you guys agree with that?
I think this might be something good for us to keep in our records to refer to when you do a contract.
That's what I was
you know,
thinking, we're
good
supposed to
notes
fill it
or
out,
something.
almost like.
But I wouldn't pass it out
So
to have
it's like
them
if
sign
you guys-
Right,
necessarily.
we'll probably have some disclosure, but it'll be an abbreviated version, because there is some stuff
So
I
we
think that we should make sure that
Well, I
we're
know,
disclosing
yeah.
some.
You know what I'm
And then
saying?
we
So yeah,
have,
it's almost like a
this
checklist for
checklist
us, so, right?
for the buyer inspection acknowledgement.
Seems like a
Who needs
checklist.
one of those?
I will.
It's on the flip side. If
I might
we
not
have
have
a
that.
disclosure.
It's on this side. If you flip over
It's
the
on the flip
disclosure.
side of the disclosure.
Yeah, no, all the way to buyer disclosure.
Yours might be a little bit different.
You lose.
Oh, okay.
What is it?
You
I got it.
I think it's.
I got it.
Are we looking for them?
Oh, yeah, I do need one.
This,
She might have
Yeah,
one.
you get that.
We'll go through everything. Sorry. I was running a little late because I had a guy walk in the office and it's a roof leak. Oh, actually, turned out it was two roof leaks.
Thank you.
no.
I had to go down and
Thank you. Thank you.
visit with him.
Well,
All right, so.
You mean in the new office, still listed?
Not our office, it was
Oh,
the
just a
house.
house.
Okay.
That was sold.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so one of the documents you should have is the seller and buyer disclosure. One of them is a, something I called, notes for residential contract for sale and purchase, which looks like this.
We don't have that one.
nada.
No?
We don't have that. Oh, and this, is this it?
So we're gonna need copies of that too.
Yeah.
Who needs these
I
notes?
have.
I'll take your notes.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I know, get it. Oh, well. Okay.
So Terry's really the only one that I think really gave me acknowledgement that she agrees that we should probably cut this back and not should not restate stuff that's already in the contract. And I agree with you that it's great to have a reminder, and that's part of the notes that I'm kind of trying to put together. That's also a work in progress. But honestly, you should know the contract well enough that you know what you
Don't
need
need the
notes.
notes, yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the contract is.
Work smarter, not
you know,
harder.
So if you're not taking the time to actually sit down and read through the contract periodically and kind of cross-reference the term, the paragraphs that refer to one another and all that kind of stuff, that's something you should do. Just
Cause it changes.
take it off a little bit. Yeah, it hasn't changed recently, but
No, but,
it changed, it was changing there pretty often there for a little while, right?
yeah. Maybe a little
Biggest
bit,
change
yeah.
was the last one with the financing, where they changed when you had to have the 3-day advance, the documents 3 days in advance. And that one, actually, one thing I learned from that was, you know, you have your financing contingency, which is usually what, 30 to 45 days from the effective date. It's kind of pretty normal to get your loan approved, to get your loan commitment. But if the appraisal hasn't been done, and then the appraisal comes back late after the financing contingencies runs out, and it's short, the appraisal is lower than the purchase price, they can still back out of the deal. Buyer can get out of the deal if the appraisal comes up short, even though you're beyond the financing contingency. Okay, so does that make, yeah, Terrence?
That's with or without the appraisal contingency?
Well, okay, so good question. So that's why we're talking about appraisals, is we believe that you should have an appraisal contingency on every contract. And I'll preface that, at least every financing contract, but there's no harm in doing it with a cash deal too, giving your buyer the option of having the appraisal done. They don't necessarily have to do it, but it gives them the option of doing it, and then that way, then it would protect you, because if the house doesn't appraise, your buyer's not gonna be forced to buy it. Because under normal financing, most people, and I was one of them, used to think that the financing contingency protected you from that. But if you have a really strong buyer that is taking out a loan just because interest rates are low, but they got plenty of cash in the bank, or they've got other assets, their house might not appraise, but they might still be able to qualify for the loan. So they would end up buying a house for paying more for the house than what it appraised for. So that's why we are recommending now that on every contract, you know, for the VA and the FHA ones, you have to have that. You have to have the VA and FHA addendum attached for that financing. But now what we're suggesting is put that appraisal contingency on any conventional financing, and probably a cash deal too. John?
I had one, not to get into the weeds too much on that, but there was a cash deal that my buyer asked for an appraisal contingency, and it's over the 244,000. Then we're gonna have the right to back out and change the price. So, and it was the first time I'd run into anything like that. Hopefully it'll last, but sometimes the seller might
Yeah.
get insulted and try something screwy like this. Guy happened to be a local judge.
I was gonna say, that's a smart seller though.
It is. I mean, usually you're not required to provide the appraisal to the seller.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of interesting that somebody would do that. The other thing you gotta be careful of, especially on these FHA and VA, where you're asking for the seller to cover some of your closing costs, because your customers don't have enough cash to close, or they want to conserve their cash, is you can't bump up the purchase price so high that
The appraisal.
it's not gonna appraise, right? Because
I
that's
had that
not-
happen.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's not uncommon.
People wanted it was $140,000 house, and I knew that that's where the appraisal was gonna be. And they wanted a 150, 160, they were willing to pay for it, and I said, but it's gotta appraise.
Yep. Yeah, so, you know, Kelly, in our office,
Yeah.
she's buying a house now, and I'm helping her with that. And we're using the commission to help cover her, but the lender wanted us to put in there that she can get up to 6% for closing and prepaid
Yeah.
items, but that includes a 3% commission. But still, if somebody puts 6% on a deal, it's hard to cover 6% with your closing costs and prepaid items. Plus, that house was listed for 150 and she's paying like 159. So, now we feel pretty confident that it's gonna appraise because I think the guy underpriced the house. But under normal circumstances, I'd be really hesitant
Yeah, I
to
was
put that
afraid.
much on top.
Yeah.
Like the house I'm buying up now, to the short sale, we put 3% on. So, you know, I won't cover all the closing costs, but I'll cover probably most of them. But anywhere 3 to 4% is usually about as high as you can go. You can get creative too with some of the stuff that, if the lender and the title company will let you, you can start throwing more stuff in there if you got money left on the table. Like you could, of course, put your escrow money for your taxes and insurance on there, but pay your
Into the
first
prepaid,
year's
yeah.
insurance out of it. I've put my inspections on there, of course, the appraisals.
On that 6% prepaid?
Yeah,
Or
if there's
up
money
to-
left over.
up to, yeah.
If I can't come up with, if the lender isn't charging enough fees to help cover all that money you're getting from the seller,
Hmm.
instead of leaving it on the table, we've just come up with a bunch of stuff, throw a home warranty on the house. I mean, just load it up with as much stuff as you can and use up all the money, because otherwise you just walk away
Gone,
from it.
yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, you guys all know how to get into your dashboard, right? And get into .loop. This is the way I do it. I think there's another way to do it, but I go in through my transactions. And then, and again, these are all gonna be changing, but just to get you guys used to going into the documents. So what I did was, I'm just gonna pull up a contract. I was looking at the, not the as is. What I call the general repairs and maintenance contract. Why is it not
I've never used that one.
Chris,
You've never used this one? Okay.
Always as is.
So before Hurricane Charlie, this
Right.
was what everybody used, you know? If you saw an as-is contract before Hurricane Charlie, then immediately your antenna went off and you thought something was wrong with the house,
Yeah.
right? So then, John,
Oh, no, sorry. Okay.
do you guys see that okay? So anyway, so then Hurricane Charlie came and everything was damaged, so everybody started using as-is. Then we got into the foreclosure and short sale world, so all the banks said, you gotta use as-is. So how many people have been in real estate since 2004? Nobody, okay. So everybody got used to doing as is, right? So I've talked to agents who, and we were doing so much cash deals back then too. There were agents that were in the business like 2 to 3 years and had never done this type of contract and had never done a financing transaction.
Wow.
Can you believe
Wow.
that?
That's
That's pretty hard to
insane.
believe, right? But that's the way the world was back then. So now, since we've gotten past most of those issues with the foreclosures and the short sales, and you know the hurricane's kind of a distant memory, more and more agents are starting to come back to this. And the biggest difference is if you go through this contract, I mean, it's almost word for word
The same.
until you get down to the repairs and maintenance clause, which so like where here it says the seller shall pay the following amounts, percentages of the purchase price for the following costs and expenses. So there's 3 different categories. There's the general repairs category, and you know 1.5% is the norm. Although if you start getting up into a higher price point, a lot of times what you'll see is a number in there. Because if you're selling a $1 million house, the seller probably doesn't want to be on the hook for $45,000 because you could be on the hook for 1.5% here, 1.5% here, and 1.5% here.
It's a lot of cash.
Yeah, so most guys, you know, you might see 5,000 or something like that on a really high priced house. So the general repairs and maintenance items, we'll get into that, because that's really where, most of the time, that's where you're gonna run into your issues. The wood destroying organism treatment and repairs, so you got termites and mold and wood destroying organisms. So that's another amount. And then you have costs with closing of open or expired building permits. So again, that wasn't on here way back before Charlie. I mean, that was something that's been added since. And we're starting to see more and more of that. If you guys haven't been seeing it, you've probably run into it, where you've got somebody that they didn't have a permit, there's no permit on record for the roof repair or for the pool cage, or
Water
they enclosed the
heater.
lanai
Yeah.
or the water heater. Or they might have pulled a permit, but it just never got closed out. So
Yeah.
then that's gotta get taken care of. So that's what that's for. The problem is, it's what you run into a lot, is what we're running into with this house that has a water leak, is the contractor's kinda gone dark. Like, he's not, I don't think he's in business anymore. So a lot of times, I had a deal, I sold a lady a house, a short sale. After Charlie, they had pulled a permit for the pool cage. And back then, I didn't really think to check for permits. I thought the inspector did that, to be perfectly honest with you. So, my bad for not realizing that, but what happened was she went to pull a permit to redo her bathrooms. And they found, during that process, they found an open permit on the pool cage that hadn't been closed out. So we're like, oh, it's a big deal, we'll just get that permit closed. Well, when the guy from the county came out to look at the pool cage, he realized that what they built was different than what was on the application for the permit. They expanded the pool cage. So then, this is like probably 5 years after the fact. And so then the question is, okay, is the pool cage that's there up to current code? Because if it wasn't, they could tell them to rip it down or reinforce it or do something to it. So I ended up hiring an engineer to redraw the plans of what was built. And then I was gonna have to get a contractor to come out and certify that it was built to current code. So I got really lucky that it was built to code, and the engineer that drew the plans was willing to sign an affidavit for me saying that it was up to code.
Wow.
So it only cost me $300. So, you know, if we had to tear that thing down, you know, that would have been me in the E&O claim probably, even though, you know, technically we're not obligated, that's not supposed to be part of our deal, that we're not the expert with all that stuff, but chances are, something like that goes wrong, there's gonna be a lawyer, and they're gonna try to name us in some kind of illegal action, and we're gonna have to call the E&O company, and the E&O company's gonna bang us for either $2,500 or $5,000 deductible. So, just, you know, that's what you're potentially facing if we run into one of these problems. So, you know, if you're going on a listing appointment and you pull up the property record and the house is 1,200 square feet, and you go into the house and it's clearly bigger than that, and the owner starts telling you, well, it's not 1,200, it's 2,000, you know, that's like your antennas go up immediately and say, you know, there's a potential problem here, because for several reasons. First of all, how do you know if the area that they enclosed was done by a licensed contractor and is up to code? And then the other issue is, when an appraiser walks in, they're not gonna use that square footage to do the appraisal, they're gonna use what's on the public record. So there's ways to fix that. Sometimes I've seen the county will just send somebody out to verify the new square footage, but everybody's always nervous that what happens if he comes out and he says, you know, I've gotta get plans drawn up, or I've got to rip it down, you know, so, if you run into a situation like that, then you probably should have a conversation and figure out the best way to approach it, but, just be aware of that kind of stuff. So anyway, you know, and then as is contracted, that you guys are probably more familiar with, the seller has no obligation to fix anything. It doesn't matter what it is. You throw them an inspection report and say the roof's leaking and the whatever, you can tell them, you could just say, well, that's fine, you take it or leave it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of times agents like giving their buyers that out, I guess, that protection. but at the same time, then the seller's not required to fix anything. So then you gotta decide. Well, for one thing, like this guy today that has the roof leak, they used an as-is contract on that house. They did an inspection, found the one leak, and the seller did agree to get it fixed. Then the inspector went back and said it was fixed, and it turns out it's not. So like in that case, this contract would have protected the buyer better, because he could have held the seller's feet to the fire better to make sure the repairs were done properly. So it really depends, but when you're talking to your customers, part of your job probably should be to explain the difference between the two contracts. You know, this gives them this peace of mind that the seller will take care of certain repairs if they're repairable items, whereas the other contract gives them the out if they want to get out for some reason. Now the problem is too, sometimes you're working with buyers who are kind of tire kickers, and they'll go around and just throw offers and stuff and go under contract with an as-is contract and then just keep walking away. So you got to decide how valuable your time is if you run into somebody like that. The other thing about this whole repair thing is, any work that needs to be done as a result of these inspections has to be done by a licensed person. Like, so if it's a roof issue, it's got to be a licensed roof guy. If it's a window guy, it's got to be a licensed window guy. So, some of our inspectors offer like a pre-listing inspection, which isn't an official inspection. So it's not something that would have to be disclosed necessarily, unless there's something that materially affects the market value of the house, then it had to be disclosed. Or they could take care of it. Their buddy down the street who's an electrician could come by and take care of it. Or their brother, or Bob, who's a contractor from up north, they could take care of it if it wasn't anything real material, and it would probably cost them a lot less money, and then it won't come up theoretically on an inspection report, okay? So that's one thing. If you guys, that's another thing we should probably be offering all our sellers when we're taking listings, is they can have a pre-listing inspection done that doesn't go on record. And that way it might save them, especially if they think there are a lot of issues, they should try to get rid of them before they list the house, right? And then the wood destroying organisms. So the thing about the wood destroying organisms is, make sure that that's getting ordered. Don't just assume that your inspector's gonna order it for you. I mean, some of them will, but just make sure they are, because if they're not gonna do it, somebody needs to do it, right? So make sure you're checking with your inspectors, doing that. And this thing with the permits, the open permits, again, it's really beyond the scope of our job. I know a lot of agents do it. A lot of agents will pull the permit log from the county or the city where the house is done. You just don't want to be the final voice to explain to your buyer, especially, it looks like everything's fine, because you might not know what you're looking at. Right?
Usually, like Suncoast Title, you get this to them in a timely manner and say, hey, check the file for permits, and they'll make sure that it's clear.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's another way you can handle it. If you're working with a good title company or a good inspector that'll do this, that's great. But don't assume somebody else is doing it, because it might not be. And if you do find something that's kind of a little, well, actually, regardless of what you find, if you're pulling the report, even if everything looks fine, I would probably send it to my customer in an email and give them the name of, or the phone number of the building department that they can call, contact them to make sure that everything is okay. Because you don't want to be the messenger with that, because well, for a couple of reasons. The person you talked to on the phone, they might have given you the wrong information, right? So, or you might not think to ask a question that your customer might have. So, for sure, I mean, it's good to go, in my opinion, it's good to go and give a higher level of service, but just the fact that you're providing this information to them is a higher level of service than probably most agents are doing. You just don't want to be the judge and jury of what the results are of any of this stuff, really. All right?
Jim, if you go, so if, let's say that they're, that 1.5% in any category is $3,000. Then if the repair is going to cost $3,500, at that point, does either party have the right to back out, or only one party?
Well, if you're, good point, John. So if you're exceeding that limit on any one of these all stand alone, right? You don't combine them. They all stand alone. So if any one of those categories, the repairs are going to be more than the allowance, the seller can say, that's fine, I'll take care of it, and then the buyer's still stuck in the deal. The seller could say, well, I'll take care of my 1.5%, but you're on the hook for the balance, and then the buyer can walk away. I guess that's the two scenarios, right?
Yeah.
You either do it or, yeah, so it depends which side of the coin you're on.
And
Or the buyer could say, yeah, fine, you know, you can provide that and I'll take care of the balance and stay in the deal.
the other thing that always seems to be a little cloudy is, okay, now the seller has taken care of the roof problem under this, and that's all squared away. And they tell the buyer 2 weeks before closing, I took care of the roof, it's all squared away. What right at that point, even if the inspection period is passed in the meantime, does the buyer have the right to come back and say, okay, now I want to inspect that repair?
Well, see, what I would do is you're gonna have an addendum for that, right, for the repairs?
That's right, obviously.
So you're gonna prepare an addendum that says, you know, these are the items that we agree that the seller's gonna fix. And, you know, the contract calls for it all to be done by a licensed, insured, you know, guy. Personally, I think in the addendum, you should reiterate that, just to be on the safe side. But I would also put a reinspection clause in that addendum saying that upon notification that the repair's been completed, you know, we have the right to reinspect, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you probably, you know, you have the right to do the walkthrough right before you go to closing. So I guess you could use that as your ability to check the repairs, but that might be kind of late, you know what I mean? So I would probably tend to try to get my inspector back out there after they tell me. But I'd also, so if I was gonna do an addendum for repairs like this, what I would do is I would say, okay, these are the items that you're agreeing to repair. The work's to be done by a licensed, whatever it is, roofer, whatever needs to be done. And it's to be completed at least so many days prior to closing, you know, and then I have the right to have it re-inspected within, I don't know, 48 hours or whatever after notification that it's done, that kind of thing. Yeah, because you don't want them going right up to the end of the wire.
I got one that's come doing that right now.
So, you know, one of the mistakes I think a lot of agents make too is they get the inspection done. And then, well, they do a couple different things. They get an inspection report and then they just throw it at the other agent and say, okay, here's the inspection report, without identifying the items that they expect to request that they get repaired, right? I guess they think you're supposed to interpret what the report says, but really, the buyer's agent should be talking to the buyer and saying, okay, what do you want me to ask for to get repaired? And then there are the items that I would delineate in an email or something. And I would probably send them a copy of the summary that shows all the deficiencies, or maybe the whole report, but I would definitely I'd itemize the things that I want fixed.
One thing that came up interesting, I just read about it like last week, I think it was in the Realtor magazine that we get, and which surprised me, and that is, if the seller doesn't respond to your request, and there's not a written request with a signature on it saying, this is the stuff we found in the inspection report that we want repaired. So if you just, like you say, throw the report at them and say, hey, we need to talk about this, or we got stuff here we want, and it's not formally signed by the buyer and stuff, and the seller just keeps his mouth shut, and the clock runs out,
Yep.
you're done.
Yeah.
You gotta go to closing.
The
Yeah,
clock runs out.
or
So
you just talking on the phone or
Yeah.
texting. I'm still not a big fan of agents
I know,
negotiating
emails
under
or
text.
writing.
What's that?
Emails or writing.
Yeah, so, you're right though, so when you do the inspection, when you have an inspection period, what that inspection period says is you have 10 days or 15, whatever it is, to have the inspection performed, get the report, you know, and have the inspection done by a licensed inspector in the state of Florida. Because a lot of people like to send their Uncle Bob, who's a contractor up in Georgia, right? Well, that's not a valid inspection report. So, you know, if you're gonna try to use inspection for negotiation purposes, you know, the appropriate way to do it is have a licensed inspector go do the inspection, get the inspection report, and then report back to the other party in writing what the issues are prior to the end of your inspection period, right? So a lot of agents make that mistake too. They start talking about what repairs need to get done and all that stuff, and everybody's, you know, singing Kumbaya.
Instead of putting it in
And then the
writing.
inspection report or period ends and nothing's in writing, yeah.
Yeah, your buyer is out of luck, basically.
Yeah, and then you're kind of stuck.
I had the other situation where I was the listing agent and the buyer's agent had the inspections done a week and a half before, and I kept on going, are you gonna send me a request? Are you gonna send me a request? And it came down to like 2 days before the inspection period was over, and it got to the point where I was like, if I ask again, I'm doing my seller a disservice.
Yeah.
I should be trying to run the
Yeah.
clock out here.
Yeah.
Great point. I try
Yeah.
to tell agents that all the time, like, they're agonizing over something like that, and I'm like, that's not your problem. You know, just let it go. Don't poke the bear, because it's that other agent's
Yeah.
problem.
Well, you
know?
wanna do the right thing, but you
Well,
don't
you
wanna
do,
do a
but
bad
it's-
job, you wanna get the,
Interesting.
yeah, right.
Don't keep pounding them for it.
Yeah.
Right, right. Mention it once and then.
Right, for real.
Yeah.
Do your
Give
job,
them that
that's it.
courtesy.
Did you have a question or comment?
I actually just had a question about, going back to the two different contracts. Do
Yeah.
you explain both of them to your buyer and have them decide which one they wanna use, or do you recommend choosing one or the other, depending on your situation?
I think you should explain the difference between the two of them and then let them choose. I know a lot of agents, like Nancy Weber's a great agent, and she like hates this contract. So she'll push the as-is contract as hard as possible.
Sometimes it's in the MLS too.
Yeah.
If you have the buyer and the seller states to use the as-is.
Yeah.
That's a good point. If they state to use the as-is, can you go ahead and use the crisp?
Well, this isn't crisp, this is Farwell.
Repair
So we're-
limits.
So you guys understand?
Yeah.
Yeah,
She's
I
talking
meant
about
to say
crisp
repair
as
limits.
another type of contract that is out there. And
But
you might see it
it's
from
not
time
the
to time,
as-is.
but we don't recommend using
No.
it. Because the main in my mind, the reason is because it's FAR means it was approved by the Florida Association of Realtors and the Florida Bar Association. So if a lawyer happens to get involved, the first thing they're gonna say is, why didn't you use the FAR bar? And they're gonna make you look like an idiot, so. But you'll see all kinds of different contracts out there. But you could always, if say you had a listing and you got a contract in on a crisp, okay? And you're not familiar with the crisp, you could always recommend to your seller, that's a little counter, but we're gonna counter on a FAR bar. You know? There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Could it be the same way if the listing agent asked for as-is contract and the buyer's agent sent it in on this contract, repair limits, And they said, we didn't want repair limits, we want it as is.
Right.
Can they accept it? Can they reject
Oh,
it?
yeah, they can accept it, but yeah, if they're really adamant that they want it as is, they're probably gonna reject it. They're probably
Cross
gonna
out.
turn it back into an as is.
Yeah, and then they'll send you this.
We'll cross it
Yeah.
out.
So, yeah, we had a contract recently where somebody sent this in, but they wanted it to go back to an as-is, so they put the as-is addendum on it, which to me, I don't even know why we have that.
Why?
So I said to him, why don't you just
Read it.
replace it with an as-is
Yeah.
contract? Because to me, that's just confusing.
And the other thing that you run into when you're dealing with sellers, which hopefully everybody will be dealing with lots of sellers, because that's what you should be trying to do, is that they think that as is means that they don't have any responsibility to do anything.
Yeah.
That's why they
Correct.
think it's better for them.
Yeah.
So you can go with an as-is with the seller, but make sure you explain to them that it doesn't let them off the hook. They still have to disclose.
Right.
They still have, there's still gonna be a negotiation that takes place after the inspection and all that kind of stuff. So-
Well, and if they get an inspection report that identifies something that is significant and warrants disclosure, then they need to disclose it if that deal doesn't go through.
Yeah.
And you're kind of obligated to disclose it next time, so are we.
Yeah.
So if you get a seller who doesn't want you to disclose something,
Mm.
you know,
Eventually
you're
you
supposed to
will.
walk away from that listing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I'm just gonna go down to, where they talk about these their general repair limit and what that actually, and what repairs are really necessary. Well, let's go through this first. So this is, I hate the way this contract's written, where you got part of it up there, part of it down here,
way
part
down
of it.
here.
But anyway, so your inspection period, the standard's 15 days. If you're gonna go shorter than that, I would try to make sure I got my contract, or my inspector lined up to do the inspection ahead of time. And it says right here, like what John was saying, if buyer fails to timely deliver to seller a written notice or report required, buyer shall have waived seller's obligation to repair. So that's what you were talking about, right? So, one of the things that agents do all the time is, okay, you get your inspection report. So the one mistake is they don't really identify anything. The other one is they do all this work to go around and get all these estimates to get all the repairs done. That's not really required. You're required to report the items that need attention. It's really the listing agent and the buyer and the seller's responsibility to figure out how much that's gonna cost and then come back to you, because they have I think you have whatever time you put in here to have the inspection done, and then they have, I think it's 10 days after you notify them to get back to you with, we'll double check that, but there's a time limit as to when they need to come back to you with their response. So you don't have to run around and get all these estimates together before the inspection period's over. So if you're kind of up against the deadline, just get the repair report over to them with the items that you're identifying. The other option is, say you have a roof issue on the house. Everything else is fine, but you got a problem with the roof and you're running up against the deadline. Just get an extension on the roof to have a roofer go out there and take a closer look at that, or the air conditioner, or whatever the case may be. You don't necessarily have to get an extension on the whole inspection period. Actually, if I had the listing, I wouldn't let you get an extension on the whole repair. I would just want to limit it to that one thing. So that's something to keep in mind if you got listings. You don't have to, it's not like an all or none kind of thing. You can always just extend for that specific item, okay? So the items that are covered under this general repairs. So here's where it says that you have to have the inspection done by a person who specializes and holds an occupational license if required by law, which it is in Florida, to conduct home inspections. Or they can be a Florida, it can be a general contractor, or somebody that's got an inspector's license. So they're gonna go in and they're gonna look at the property, and the items that they're gonna specifically be looking for.
So it can't be, a handyman with a license?
I don't think a handyman,
I think they have a license, yes.
yeah. I probably would not use a
Yeah.
handyman. Honestly, I'm not sure what the correct answer is, but I would either use it. Personally, I like to use contractors or inspectors, because then they can give you an estimate on what the work is
Yeah.
that needs to be done. Whereas if you're using just a normal inspector, they're not supposed to be giving you
Any information.
estimates, right? So, like in this case, you know, the house has to be free of leaks, water damage, or structural damage, which, you know, makes sense, to the ceiling, the roof, the exterior and interior walls, doors, windows, and foundation. So the structure of the house, that all makes sense, right? And then the above items together with the pool equipment, major appliances, heating, cooling, and it says non-leased major appliances. So one thing to ask when you're going on a listing appointment or working with a buyer is if there are any items on the property that aren't owned. Like a water treatment system is more usually the one that tricks people up once in a while. Like you'll have a system that's being leased, and if you assume that it's owned, then you might be buying a water system, okay? So you don't want to be that guy that does that. So, you know, all this stuff makes sense, right? So they're all kind of major items, but some of the things have to be in working condition, which means that they're operating in the capacity of which they're intended. So torn screens is one thing. So if you have screens and they're torn, they're supposed to be repaired. If you don't have screens, you just don't have screens, okay? So you don't need that. You can't expect them to put screens in if they're not screens.
Actually, had a buyer find a whole bunch of screens behind the fence in the backyard.
Oh, really?
So, hey,
Took
I
off
do
all the
have
screens in the
screens.
house and threw them
Oh.
over the fence.
Wow.
So, you know, that's one that we see sometimes where people make an issue out of screens, but if they're not there, they're just not there. And then roof tiles is another one. Like if you have missing roof tiles, they have to be replaced. If you have cracked roof tiles, it's just cosmetic. They don't have to replace a cracked roof tile. That one I don't really understand, to be perfectly honest with you, but.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and then fogged windows, that's another one. If you have fogged windows in the house, that's a repairable item.
Hmm.
So,
Wish I knew that.
now the question would
Wish I'd
be,
known that when we
like,
bought our house.
to
Yeah,
what
me too.
degree is it fogged? You
Yeah.
know, is it fogged
You
just
can't
up in the little
see.
corner up there? So that might be something that could be subject to judgment. But they're not, the seller's not required to repair or replace cosmetic conditions. And some of these things, people will not quite get, like a pool with pitted marshite. We've all seen that, right? Pitted marshite pools, that's not repaired, that's not required to be repaired. You can ask for it, but the seller's not required to do that. Worn spots and discoloration of floor colorings, wallpapers or window treatments, nail holes, scrapes, scratches, dents, chips or caulking in ceiling, walls, flooring, tiles, fixtures or mirrors, and minor cracks in walls, floor tiles, windows, driveways, sidewalks, pool decks, and garage and patio floors. So, you know, if you see a lot of cracks in the foundation or the flooring, it may be indicative of a structural problem, and then you probably have to get an engineer out there to kind of judge that if it looks like it's significant enough. But what I used to do when I was walking through houses with people would be, if I saw something that was cosmetic in nature, I would take it as an opportunity to kind of point that out to them, that, you know, I don't know if you noticed the tiles are cracked. I just want to remind you that's not something the seller would be required to fix. And then that way, when you get the report back, if there's stuff, because there's always stuff like that in the report, you know, then you can remind them you had that conversation when you're going through the house, and then hopefully that puts that to bed kind of quick. So, does anybody have any questions about that? You know, cracked roof tiles, curling or worn shingles, or limited roof life shall not be considered defects that they must repair and replace so long as there's no leakage. So, or structural damage. Now, one thing we're starting to see a lot of, though, is insurance companies are starting to look a lot closer at the useful life on roofs, on air conditioning systems, on, I think even plumbing. What's the other one? Air conditioning, roofing, and the electrical. You know, some of these houses have those little electrical boxes, so some of the insurance companies are gonna, they might quote it, but it'll be a lot more expensive if it has some of those issues.
Yeah,
And
aluminum
then,
wiring and them.
yeah, if it's old enough, what is it, 30 years to get a 4-point?
I think
I
so.
think there's some of them
I
are
think
shorter
so.
than that up too. I think it might even, 30 years would be back in the 80s. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so if your house is over a certain, and each insurance companies are starting to come up with their own rules now too. So one insurance company might say if it's more than 20 years old, they want you to have a 4-point inspection. So try to find that out too when you're going to order your inspections, because if you can get it all done at the same time, your customer's not gonna spend as much money as they would if the guy goes out to do the normal inspection and then has to go back out and do the 4-point
They give you a
inspection.
break. Most
Or the wind
inspectors will
mitigation.
remind you of that.
Yeah.
Hey, this house is this age, you wanna do a 4-point.
Yeah, yeah, if you're working with a good inspector.
Yeah, they're good like that.
So, so that brings up the issue of insurance. I mean, if you're not getting your customers on their insurance right away, you should be, because that can make or break it down, right? If they find out their insurance is gonna be a lot more expensive than they thought it was gonna be.
Yeah, especially flood.
Yeah, because the house, maybe the house wasn't in a flood zone when these people bought it, but now it is.
Yeah.
These people don't have a
Surprise.
loan,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, you should definitely get them in touch with their insurance people, or put them in touch with somebody that you work with. Yeah, here it is. There's, seller shall have 10 days after receipt of buyer's written notice or general inspection report to either have the reported repairs items estimated by an appropriately licensed person and copy delivered to buyer. So, you know, you have your inspection period and then they have 10 days to respond. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't go ahead and get your own estimates and stuff like that, but don't feel like you gotta do all that within your inspection period. Personally, if I have a choice and there's some repair items that need to be done that's not gonna prevent the deal from closing, I think I'd almost rather just get a credit for the work and then let my buyer take care of it themselves.
Well, sometimes some subcontractors are busier now. It's hard to get them out there to
Well,
give you an
yeah.
estimate.
The other issue is if you, well, like that house today, you know,
Yeah.
so they had an inspection. The inspection found a roof leak. They reported it to the seller, and the seller agreed to repair it even though it was an as-is contract. And now we're finding out the repair wasn't done properly. So we can't even go back to the guy that supposedly did the repair and get him to take care of it because we don't even know who it is, which we're trying to find out, but it's been difficult. So that's the way I would prefer to handle it myself, is just to take care of it myself. And then that way, if I've got a problem with the way the work was done, then, you know, I know who to go back to, yeah. You just don't wanna, as a buyer, I don't know that I'd wanna solely rely on the information that the sellers provided me for those repairs, cause they might have gotten their buddy to give them a low price on the repairs to try to negotiate a lower settlement with you. So I would probably be cautious of that. Yeah, Terrence.
With the general repairs being that it has to be done by a licensed and insured contractor or something along those lines, should the buyer expect like a receipt or?
Yeah, you should be able to ask for documentation for the repairs.
Okay.
Yeah. You're gonna run into agents that are gonna try to avoid giving that stuff to you, but yeah.
I thought you said that you had to provide something.
that showed that the repairs were done.
Yeah, that's what I was just looking at.
Sometimes it takes forever to get them from another agent.
So it says, provide a copy of such report and estimates of repairs to fire. So the seller does have the right to have their own inspection done if they don't agree with the results of yours, and then you kinda gotta work that out. But, I think there is something in here that says
That's
that.
not ever
Yeah.
in one place.
I'll see if I can find that. And then these wood destroying organisms and all, this is not, this isn't as subjective, I guess, as the general repairs clause is. I mean, usually there's either evidence of active infestation or there's not. The only issue we run into sometimes is there's evidence that there may be or had been infestation, and then, you know, you kind of debate, if they've had the house treated, they should be able to provide you with some kind of a report from when it was treated, and it should probably be covered by the warranty on the treatment. Sometimes people can't produce that information, so these things you just kind of gotta just play out whatever the scenario is and just do what, you know, is in the best interest of your customer. And the building permits, again, that's pretty clear cut too. There's a time frame for everything, like, you know, things have to be done. You know, again, the seller's got like 10 days to take care of something. And then even here it says no later than 5 days prior to closing, seller shall, up to the permit limit, have open and expired building permits identified by buyer or known to seller, closed by the applicable government entity, and obtain and close any required building permits for improvement to the property. And then the seller shall provide buyer with a written documentation that all open and expired building permits, you know, have been closed out, or that the seller has obtained and closed required building permits. So there again, they've got to give you the documentation. All these time frames in here, I mean, nobody's gonna I know I can't memorize every one of these, so I don't try to memorize every one of these time frames, but, you know, I know where to go back to in the event that I run into that situation. Then just go back and refresh your memory. I mean, it's good to have a working knowledge of this stuff, but if you run into a situation like this, you shouldn't just be relying on your memory. You should be going back and reading the contract and seeing what it says, so you can have that conversation with your customer. Okay, and then the walkthroughs. Now this is the same in both contracts, the walkthrough and the reinspection. So on the day prior to closing or on closing date, prior to the time of closing. So that's pretty specific. You're not, you know, you can go back and check on stuff at the house before the day before closing if you want, but technically the walkthrough should be done either the day before or the day of closing. As a buyer's agent, I wouldn't want to be doing, what I would do is if there was something about the house that I was concerned about, like if there's a busted up old boat in the backyard or a broken down old car or just a bunch of junk in the garage that I thought might be left behind, like a bunch of old paint cans or something. First of all, on the contract, I'm gonna put them as excluded items in the contract and say they'll be removed at least 5 days prior to closing or something like that. And then I would go out to the house like 5 days prior to closing and make sure they're gone. And if they're not gone, I'm gonna be on the phone to the agent and say, hey, what's going on? And if they seem to be kind of like not too concerned about it, I'd be finding out what it's gonna cost to remove those items and then have the money escrowed at closing in case they don't get them done and you have the money to pay for it, okay? You have their money to pay for it. So, but then as far as the normal walkthrough, it should be the day before or the day of closing. The reason why I kind of bring this up is I had a deal had a condo out in Englewood, and some guy came in from out of town like a week prior to closing and went in to do the walkthrough like a week before closing, and they found a few things that they thought there was a water leak at one of the windows, which it wasn't, but the drywall had been damaged. So I just went in and fixed it. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. And then they came up with a few other knick-knack kind of things. And, you know, I had to point out to the other agent that, look, you know, I'm sorry, but you need to go back through there because you did it prematurely. So that deal fell apart, but that was when I learned. That's how I learned about this. That it's supposed to be the day before or the day of. But you're not supposed to be doing it like a week out ahead of time. That's not really good practice anyway.
Hey, Jim?
Yeah.
For the benefit of anybody that's interested, a lot of out-of-town buyers aren't here for the walkthrough.
Right.
And ask their agent, would you do the walkthrough for me?
Yeah, that's not a good.
Not a good
That's
idea,
not a
is it?
good idea. No, that's.
So what do you say, whenever they say that?
We've done it through video, video.
Yeah, I mean, that's better than just
Yeah,
do
this
it
is
through
the
video
video
through yourself.
For your own conclusion, yeah.
Cool, but,
Do like Skype or something.
but you know that,
That way they're on there.
it's not a good idea, honestly.
So
There's
what
a
do you
form
want-
for that.
what should you tell them?
Yeah.
What should you
There's a
tell
form for
them?
that.
I would recommend
There
they
is.
have their inspector go back through and
That's a good idea.
re-inspect the items that needed to be. It's no different than the county thing. Like you pull up the permits for the county and you talk to the lady at the county and she says, oh, yeah, there's a permit open on the roof. It's not a big deal, you just blah, 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 blah. So then you go and tell your customer that and they're relying on you now to take care of all that.
And it becomes
And
a
then
big
guess
deal.
what? Now it turns into a big deal.
Yeah.
And you kind of put yourself in the middle of a hornet's nest. So it's the same thing, like the house with the roof leaks, I think that's what we did with that. There was some items that were supposed to be repaired. They didn't get repaired to the buyer satisfaction. But our agent didn't think it was a big deal. So guess who's taking care of that now?
Agent?
Well, yeah.
Well, you.
Well, me and the agent are gonna have to deal with it, yeah. I mean.
You
so-
are all the agents.
So you
Welcome.
you might not think something's a big deal, but your customer might
Yeah.
think it's a big deal, you know, so I think that's a great point, that's not a good position to put yourself in. So I'd much rather have them send a friend over or the inspector.
Yeah, I never did it for anybody. I'm not gonna do that.
Now, in this case, the inspector did get back over and check the house to see if the leak was repaired. Well, I don't know what he did, because it's not fixed. It's still
How did he
leaking.
check it?
It ain't
Good
leaking when
question.
it ain't raining.
Ain't raining now.
Yeah, so, you know, the main thing is you gotta be working with a good inspector.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
If you guys, we have some good inspectors, but there's a couple that I'm not so sure, to be honest with you, so. we'll probably- So that's another point that I should stress to you. If you guys run into problems with any of the vendors that are on our list, call it, let us know, because if somebody's not doing the work to your and your customers' expectations, we need to know that, so we don't continue to carry them on our list. Or if there's people that you're using that you really like, that you think might be better than some of the people we have, you know, let us know who they are too. Kelly's the best one to kind of go through with that.
She knows everything.
Yeah, she takes care of that vendor program. Some of this stuff, again, a lot of this stuff is stuff you're not going to run across on a regular basis. This is an example of something that the broker liability, I mean, this whole paragraph talks about how we're not responsible for certain things, and that disclosure basically reiterates that. So I think we should be sitting down with our customers and discussing this with them, so that they understand what their expectations of us should be and what they shouldn't be. probably what they shouldn't be, more important than what they should be. Again, buyer default, seller default. I mean, you run into so many different situations. Most of the time when one of the parties is in default, you know, you can only do so much. At some point, if the escrow money's sitting in the title company, you can try to work that out between the parties, but at the end of the day, you don't really have any power over that. So that's gonna be, I mean, I've often recommended to my customers, like, yeah, I think I would probably not release the deposit if the buyer didn't make a good faith and diligent effort to get his financing in order. I probably wouldn't give it back to him. From a buyer's perspective, they want to get out of the contract, you know, I'm going to tell them what I think if it's at risk or if his deposit's at risk or not. But at the end of the day, those two people have to sign off on a cancellation and release to get that money out of escrow. And you have no power over that. So, you know, a lot of times when they can't come to an agreement, we see some kind of a negotiation where the money's split or something. Because if they end up going to arbitration over the commission, unless it's a huge commission, the attorneys are going to end up with all that money in the courts.
I had a situation where I actually had to tell my client, who was the buyer, they put down $6,000 on a piece of property, and we went over to take a look at the property 3 days before the closing to make sure that some stuff was done, and they said, oh, by the way, John, if you know, just to let you know, I'm not going to have the money on Friday. And I was like, wait, what? And they said, yeah, I'm not going to be able to get the money on Friday. And I was like, okay. And they said, what do you think I should do? And I said, you should expect not to get your $6,000 back.
Yeah.
She said, well, I'll just get a lawyer. And I said, well, you could do that, and you'll probably pay the lawyer your $6,000, and then you'll lose. So your best bet is probably, from my standpoint, just sign the cancellation and lose the $6,000. And that's what they did.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But I was like, you know, this isn't like buying a shirt at Walmart. You
Yeah.
don't just go, oh, well, I changed my mind.
Right.
Yeah. You know,
What contract did you use?
Huh?
What contract?
It was under Maz's contract, but it wouldn't really matter when
Did their situation change or something?
you know, she told me she had the cash, and then it turned out, well, the cash was really coming from the sale of her sister's house, which hadn't happened yet, so she wasn't gonna have the cash.
Okay. So lesson learned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody says they're a cash buyer, I'll be right with you here. If somebody says they're a cash buyer, blame it on the seller. Say, hey, you ought to get some proof of funds together because the sellers are expecting that these days.
Yes.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
that's what I try to tell them. And then you'll find out if it's sister's house.
Sister's house.
Or say it's, they think they're getting some insurance settlement. We've seen that before.
Yeah.
Seen people, they won the lottery or something and they hadn't quite gotten the money yet. Or they might have the money in a foreign bank account and that might take longer for it to get here, right? So here's your goes.
I was just curious to know, like, if there's any other type of way to remedy the situation, like asking for an extension or something like that, rather than.
Right. Oh yeah, there's always, I mean, there should be a lot of ways to get around hurdles you run into on any situation, whether it's an inspection, financing, some normal things that people run into. I mean, you would hope somebody, if they have to sell a house, that they're letting you know that up front.
Yeah.
And you're asking, and you know that up front. But the best thing to do is once you become aware of an issue, a true issue, not like a made up, make-believe issue or, you know, dark cloud out on the horizon way out there, but something that's truly an issue and you're getting to a point where it could pose a problem to keep on schedule. I think bringing it to everybody's attention sooner rather than later is better, because then probably have more options available to you. And you might find that the other party, might have a better solution than you did. So I would always, explore the options instead of just going right to cancel. One of the things I started, hey Nancy, one of the things I started doing when I had an issue that we couldn't get the other party to accept what we were trying to propose, is we were getting down to the end of an inspection period or down to the end of the financing period. I try to paint the best picture I could for my customer and say, oh, they would really like to move forward with this contract. And these are the terms that we'd like to extend or propose or whatever. However, I understand if your customer is not willing to do this, I've also attached the release and cancellation to the contract. And then that way you're not like putting them up against the wall and saying, do this or I'm out of here. You're saying, look, we'd really like to do this, but in the event that that doesn't work for you, then here's my release and cancellation. And then that way, I think it comes across better than just giving somebody like a hard line, kind of do this or not. So our star guest speaker just showed up. So Nancy Milback.
Hi.
Nancy's probably the best appraiser
Thank you.
I've ever come across.
Thank you.
So Nancy and I met. I was doing a deal down in Burnstore Village.
Where were we? I don't know.
Either in Village, somewhere.
Yes,
down
yes,
there.
yes.
And
The one with the yes.
yeah, so it was one of those giant KB homes. And back then, it was Chinese drywall days and foreclosure days and all kinds of days. And I don't know if that house was a short sale. I think it might have been.
Might have been.
So Nancy did the appraisal, and she did a good job. Not saying she didn't, but there were some things about a couple of comps that I knew about that hadn't really come of light yet, right? So I was standing out in the hallway at Thomas Ryan. I was at Thomas Ryan at the time, and I'm walking in the hallway talking to Nancy about this appraisal and explaining to her, well, that house had Chinese drywall. This house had some kind of weird situation with the seller, and so Nancy handled it probably.
Fixed it.
Well, she was willing to at least listen, right? A lot of appraisers, they just get it in their head that, doggone it, it's my report and I'm not changing anything. Nancy said, well, if you can provide me with some documentation or people that I can confirm that with, I'll be glad to take another look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in the hallway when I was talking with Nancy, and John Stoneburner from Van Dyke happened to be in the office next door. And he said, who was that you were talking to? And I told him, Nancy, and then he kind of heard my side of the conversation. So he said, give me her name. I want to put her on my panel for my appraisers, because he had the same situation where sometimes these appraisers get really stubborn and they just won't listen to reason sometimes, right?
I'm not gonna say we don't, but they don't. They just don't.
Well, and sometimes it's a lender too that puts really tight restrictions on it, right? Or no?
Yeah, but I'm finding that, I mean, a lot of people call me in for a second opinion on things because the appraisal didn't come in.
Right.
And there's not a lot I can do because the lender's got the appraisal already.
Right.
So they just wanna know what I think.
Yeah.
And I'm usually much higher than the person on there because they're not familiar with the area.
Right.
And it's especially true in PGI because they don't know which streets are which over there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so most of the lenders, especially these online lenders, your Rocket Homes and Rocket Mortgage and Home Depot or Loan Depot or whatever they're called. I mean, all they're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, they're just throwing an order out on the internet, and they're getting the person that will do it for the cheapest and respond the quickest.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Right? So they're getting, you get a guy from Tampa that comes down here and does the appraisal.
You can.
There's more than likely going to be a problem. The higher chance that there's going to be a problem with the appraisal than if you're working with somebody local.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
actually.
So, do you mind coming up to the front of the room?
No,
Would you rather,
no.
are you more comfortable sitting?
I'd rather sit if that's all right.
Okay, all right.
I'm not really a guest speaker, I'm just.
Well, the reason why I thought to bring Nancy in, especially like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we run into with FHA and VA loans is the fact that the appraisal is almost like a mini inspection.
Yes.
Right?
Well, not as much as the home inspector, but,
Right.
and I can't do VA, so I can't speak about VA, but FHA I do. Yeah, there's certain guidelines that we have to follow for the FHA.
Yeah, so what kinds of things would you look at on an FHA that you might not bother with?
Well, there's a list. We have a list that we go by. It's not that we make it up.
Right.
And the people I work for, you always have to verify it with a photo. So yes, you do actually have to go up into the attic and take a photo
Right.
of the insulation. And usually the attic is in the garage, and there's never insulation in the garage.
It's hot.
So it's 150 degrees, and you're climbing up this ladder. And I take my camera, and I'm like, just give me a picture. I don't want to get up there, you know, because I don't have to inspect it, but I just need a photo of the insulation. So that's something we do. All the appliances have to be working, no matter what they are, and they all have to be there. There has to be a stove. I don't know about a refrigerator, but at least a stove has to be there. And they always have to be working. If the house is vacant, I have to turn them all on, turn everything on, open the refrigerator, make sure the electric's on, turn the lights on, take photos of everything. I have to take photos of the water coming out of the faucet. So only if it's vacant, you know, people are living there, they assume that the water's on. Your hot water heater, if there's a real old one in the house, it will have to be replaced because it has to have a pressure release valve on it. And we have to take a photo of the release valve. There can't be any chipping paint at all. Just,
What
that's
about
it.
flooring?
It's gotta be there.
That'd be bricked or torn, right?
Well, I mean, some things you can get around a little bit. If, I recently just did one for a girl on Midway, and she had rented the home for 3 years, and now she's trying to buy it at FHA, and there's chipping paint, and she goes, I'm gonna do all this, I just don't wanna do it till I own it, you know, and she was so happy that she was getting in this house. So we kind of got around things a little bit, you know, so she could get the loan, because the owner, nothing. Take her to leave it, that was it, and she wanted it so bad. So a little chipping paint, you know, if there's no little children around, the thing behind that is if there's children around, they're gonna eat the paint, but there were no children around, so.
Right.
I always wondered why they had that peeling paint class in there.
I think that originated in New York City, Chicago, and Philadelphia, didn't it, Jim? Because all the tenements with the paint.
Kids eating paint?
And children were, some of them died and got very sick
That's
because they were eating the peeling paint because the landlords didn't care about anything.
Lead.
It was
Back
tasty.
then.
That paint, yeah.
I think they liked the taste. It had a flavor to it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sounds like
Strawberry
a personal experience.
Kids are eating a lot of things these days.
They have for lunch.
Tide Pods, yeah.
Tide Pods, yeah,
Gorilla.
yeah.
So Nancy, what do you think about the news I got today from
What?
Florida Realtors that
Yeah.
robots might replace you?
Yeah.
No kidding.
No kidding.
I'm retired. That's
I
it,
did
I
too,
Did you guys
retired.
get
yeah, I
that?
saw that, that was crazy, right?
A robot.
I didn't get that
It
news.
was
Like up to 400.
I didn't
Florida
know.
Realtors just sent it out
400,000.
today.
That's for
Who's
under
gonna use
400,000,
drones?
right?
400,000 or less. It used to be 250 or less. Now it's 400,000 or less. And they'll send a drone out. I don't think they can do it, especially like you just said.
Well,
We're
the
gonna go
problem is
up
they
in the
don't,
attic.
they don't have a mind. I mean,
No.
we've been going
Right.
through this for
Exactly.
years with the appraiser association
Never
because
went that.
they do a lot of desktop appraisals now without going out.
Right.
And honestly, your least expensive closing cost is, besides the termite inspection, is the appraisal. So what's the big squawk about?
I don't know.
It's not
They're
that much
trying to
money.
devalue all the homes.
I don't know what they're trying to do, but I can't imagine a robot.
A drone
I
flying
quit
over
that.
it.
That's it. I
No.
quit. No, I don't think it's gonna happen, no. There'll always be, listen, a lot of my business these days is private business. I have a website, I get a lot of business privately and from realtor referrals. That's my main business. And it's for people that, for an estate, or it's a pre-listing appraisal to see what I think as opposed to what the realtor thinks. You know, someone died, someone's getting divorced, they can't have drones. So for me, I'm not worried about it. If you just have a small bank business, you should be worried.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, look at Zillow, those estimates are like a joke, right? So-
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they're trying to replace us too, but.
Yeah.
of course they are.
robots.
course.
So.
You know,
I hate
we've all had to change, I was a realtor for 15 years
Right.
before I did the appraisals. And that was the time when the computers were just, a long time ago, just coming out. You know, we still had the MLS books. I don't know how long you've been doing it, Jim.
Since 2004, so not.
Oh, you're a
not
baby.
that far yet.
Okay, I'm going back into the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had the thick MLS books, and you had to just, and the writing was that big. And you had to look everything up by book. There were no computers, there was nothing to verify. There were no FISBOs, none of that, because they couldn't get any information. But once that computer came out, nobody could get information, right? It's hard. It was hard. It was a hard adjustment, you know. If you're coming in now and you're relatively new, you don't know the difference, right?
Well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of pressure from, Zillow.
Well, yeah,
And
that's-
Open Door and Red
Redfin.
Bricks and Redfin and Purple Bricks and.
I don't even know what this stuff is.
They're all, I mean, really, they're all trying to put us out, which is like Keller Williams is building our own technology.
Mhm.
So Gary Keller would tell you that there was the day, back in the day, when you had the data was in the complete control of the agent, right?
Yes.
Which you just said.
Yes.
And then it got to a point where these guys that are running the Zillows, I mean, the guy that owns Zillow started Travelocity, I think. Is that what it is, John?
I think so.
So he put travel agents out of
Yeah.
business, right?
Yeah.
So he was
Yeah.
trying to do the same thing in real estate. So they think that the data, or the technology will eliminate the agent. And
Mhm.
we believe that the tech-enabled agent will survive.
Mhm.
But a lot of, as far as I know, we're the only company that's really doing anything about it. So we're probably in better shape than a lot of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of homeowners too, as far as, listing, they want an agent. Don't you think? I do,
I think
especially
they
the
want the
older
local,
folks.
local knowledge. Yeah.
Yes, they do,
Exactly.
I
they do.
mean, PGI is a perfect example.
Yes.
I mean, like you said, I was doing a deal there one time on Columbia,
Mhm.
and it was a VA deal, and the VA inspector came from DeSoto County, and
Mhm.
he wasn't very familiar with the waterfront.
The one and only VA agent at that time.
Yeah, so he came in and he was using like comps that didn't make any sense. Like he was using sailboat, this was a powerboat
It's
problem.
powerboat, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was, some of his comps were from like, one of his comps was like 25 years older than that house that we were selling. It was ridiculous.
Mhm.
Because he didn't really know that market.
So they don't wanna take into account for waterfront versus
Yeah.
wooded? What?
Well, they don't know how to account for the
Sailboat
length of the
powerboat.
seawall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
how much value is in an oversized lot versus an undersized lot.
Yeah, big
How
difference.
far it takes to get out to open water
Yeah.
and
Right.
whether or not you do have to deal with bridges versus
Sure,
no bridges, yeah.
it's important.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're not gonna, that's why Zillow, I think, is even worse in those communities, because there are so many variables that they can't account for.
They don't know the
And only
difference.
locals know that, a local agent.
Yeah, so if you're working with a lender that is local, like, do you know how many panels you're on now for people?
Not that many anymore, probably 4 or 5, that's all.
Okay.
Because I get a
So-
lot of private business, which I
Yeah.
enjoy
Right.
more than the bank business. Well, the banks, they're okay,
Yeah.
they're okay, but the private business is nice.
Yeah, so if you guys
Working
do
with
need
homeowners.
an appraisal for some reason other than like getting one from a bank,
Thank you.
we do have Nancy's cards in our office, or if you need.
I have a
her
bunch
number.
here, I'll just leave them.
Cool. Oh, okay, good, thank you. But
Yeah.
she does do a great job. But what do you think what are the most common issues that you run into with people with appraisals that?
Oh, I just ran into one, and sorry, but it was an agent. They just blew me away because they couldn't understand why I didn't use a waterfront property for a non-waterfront subject.
What?
I don't
Are we
know.
serious?
What? Thank you.
Are
Well,
we
this was the
serious?
response. They said, we'll just adjust for it. No. You can't adjust for waterfront. You can't. You can adjust for the location of the waterfront, or how long it takes to get out, or how big the seawall is. But you can't adjust non-waterfront and waterfront. All right, it's like an apple and an orange. If you're comparing apples, you have to stick with apples. Same thing. Either way, you can't, if it's non-waterfront, you cannot use waterfront, period.
Okay.
That's it. And another one was over in Deep Creek on those lakes.
Yeah.
Now, they get more money for sure. They couldn't understand why I couldn't use regular waterfront. Well, what's not to understand? You can't have a boat, I mean, right?
Yeah.
So,
Canoe it.
and
My
these-
house is on a retention pond, what do you mean I mean?
That's what you wanna call those lakes. I can fish in there.
These are,
What do you mean
and these were
that's all?
listing agents, so that's rough because now they've overpriced the house. It's not selling, and I've been called in to give an appraisal, and it's a lot lower than the original list price. And they're getting mad at you, listing agent, they're hard.
So when you take a listing, I guess, from a bank, do they give you a copy of the contract?
Yes,
They do? Okay.
we have to look at the contract,
Okay,
so we know the number.
okay.
When I do a private appraisal for anyone, don't ever tell me what it's selling for. I don't want to know. Don't want to know what you think, because it's back here,
Sure.
all right? And I'm thinking, oh, if I don't make that number, they're not going to have their deal, you know, and I'm trying to do things for you, but to be totally impartial, I can't know the number,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, because I just had one done for this house I'm buying up in Hamilton. It's a short sale that my daughter came across. And,
Uh-huh.
you know, we think it's worth probably about $350. We got it under contract for $305, but we had $10,000 back in closing costs.
That sounds like a good deal. then.
So, and it only needs some paint and carpet, I think. So, the appraisal came back at $320.
Good.
So, but I think it was low because the guy knew what the purchase price was. You know, because all my CMA says it's higher than that.
Well, we figured it was just safe doing 320.
Yeah, exactly. So then when
Doesn't
my
really
wife,
matter.
when my wife saw the appraisal, she's like, oh, so it's not worth as much as you guys thought it was. Like, no, he knew it.
No,
Sure,
no.
knew what the contract was for.
No, an appraisal is only an opinion.
Right.
That's it. There's no right, well, unless the facts aren't right. But then you could have 3 different appraisers in and get 3 different numbers.
Right.
We all see it differently. I see it a lot different than other appraisers because I was a real estate agent for 15 years. So I see if there's quartz, I see if there's granite, I see if there's crown molding. I see a lot of stuff that the regular appraiser just goes in and doesn't make any adjustments for. Because I know that
True.
stuff costs money. We've all done it, we know how expensive it is. But not everybody sees it the same way. There's no guidebook with how much we can adjust for. We just have to stay within the Fannie Mae guidelines. So there's nothing that says you adjust $5,000 for a bathroom or for 2 and 3 bedrooms or whatever you have, or how much for a pool. Banks don't like pools.
No, they don't.
They don't like big adjustments on pools. They're not mortgaging the pool. You know, they'll take an adjustment. The most I've ever gone on an adjustment on a pool was a lot. It was $35,000, and that was because it was one of those brand spanking new Toll's homes with that pool that probably cost $100,000. That was a different story. But a regular run-of-the-mill pool that was built in the 80s or 90s, 15 grand tops.
Yeah.
And you just can't.
Yeah.
So, and on an appraisal, the lower adjustments, the better. The fewest adjustments, the better. So if I'm doing a job for someone and it's just right in there, it doesn't matter. The price is there, no problem. But I know there's differences that I could adjust for. I'll let them all go. Because when they don't see adjustments or just 1 or 2 adjustments, they'll go right through for you. Once they start asking questions, it's red flagged. So an appraiser is better at making as few adjustments as possible, as they can.
So when you first start an appraisal, do you have certain parameters you try to stay within?
Absolutely, absolutely. First is location. The closest your comps are to your subject, the better it is. You know, you can't have a house selling in Deep Creek, section 20 for $250, and the comps are over in, what's the other section, 23? And all the comps are in 23. I make a mental note of that. I won't cross Sand Hill, if anybody's familiar with Deep Creek.
But if you can find comps in that area, can
If
you ever?
you can't,
Mhm.
but you can,
You can.
most of the time.
What would you do, go back further in time, or?
Oh,
maybe
yeah, the bank will
expand the
take up
size
to
of
a
the
year,
house?
but you have to be sure that there's
Wow.
nothing there that's better.
Yeah.
You can't say, all right, it's selling for $250, all the new ones are selling at $220, but I can find one from a year ago that was $250. No, you can't do that. Only if there genuinely is nothing there to use, then they'll take one that's back further. They will, the banks I work frankly will.
How about age, how far do you go with age?
10 years. 10 years.
5 either way, or?
Yeah, 10 years, 10 years. And adjustments on age are, you know, every appraiser does it different. If it's a waterfront house for me, because it's the salt water, I'll adjust $1,000 a year. If it's just a regular house in a regular neighborhood, $500 a year, something like that. What else?
Square footage?
Has to be within 20%. Who said that? Has to be within 20% of the subject. So if you're picking comps out for an appraiser to try to help them out to see what's around, try to stay within that 20%, because if it's over or under, they won't use them.
Gotcha.
You gotta take the ones that are 20%.
Is that a hard and fast rule?
Cool.
No.
3% is pretty low.
Nothing's a hard and fast rule. However, there are suggested guidelines by Fannie Mae.
Okay.
Mostly everything gets sold off, right? Unless you're, I don't know, who's private around here? Who does private mortgages? Keeps them. Lake Michigan, I don't know. Do they keep theirs?
There's a few that hold their own.
All right, so if they hold them, it's a little easier. But if they're selling them off, the Fannie Mae guideline is what we go by. So if you go above the guideline, the red flags up. You know, if you give it a good explanation why, they'll take it.
So 20% on the square footage. You said 10 years on the age.
Yeah, 10 years on the age. The general is a mile, unless you're rural, then it's 5 to 10 miles, depending on where you are. You know.
So when you're doing a CMA, I mean, I always try, I'm not an appraiser, but I always try to look at it as if, what do I think the appraiser might do?
Right.
How will they look at it? And then I always look at the pendings too, even though you're not gonna use them, to see
Yeah.
if any of them might close.
Soon, yeah, I've done that before when there's nothing around, just to check.
I have a question. When you're doing like the CMA and you're doing an appraisal and you're going back a year to find a comp, and with the shift in how our business has been, a year ago, they were selling for more money, and now, I mean, how does that work? How do you
Well,
allow for that?
don't go back a year if there's things back 6 months.
Right,
Yeah, only if there's
Exactly.
nothing,
right,
then you go further. Well, we
Yeah.
do make time adjustments.
okay,
So that MC report that's on the MLS,
Yeah.
have you all gone into to use that for anything?
no,
Good.
no.
No good?
It's- I think it lies.
Okay.
You know,
What's that?
They keep saying the market's
The
declining in
MC
certain
report.
areas, and I don't see it, but
Could happen.
What about Remine, have you used that?
no.
Jim, I have to go, but it's in the
What about
closing
next to
documents, page 10, they have to
Take that
provide a
into
receipt.
consideration greatly or not?
Oh, yeah.
Closing documents.
I once had an
Oh,
appraiser done,
exception.
and it was on a double lot, and they said,
Sorry.
the extra lot had a garage, 2-car garage on it. You know what the value was for that, from that appraiser? $5,000. You know why? Because the septic was on a spare lot, not on where the house was. Is that bizarre?
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
You know, if you're, when you're doing an appraisal, you value the land as well. So in order to get a value for the land, you have to look up recent land sales. Now you find the closest ones, the same square footage, the most recent, if it had a view, didn't have a view, whatever the case may be. And we use about 70% of that value as an adjustment. So if a spare lot in Deep Creek was 20,000, it would only be 70% of that on an adjustment.
Okay.
So I talked to Nancy last week, because we have, well, Kelly's buying that house, right? So the septic inspection came back with, the flow was okay, but the cap and the wall are corroded. So we were curious if that would pass FHA inspection. So what we talked about was, more than likely, the appraiser's probably just gonna run the water in the house and flush the toilets and see if it flows okay.
That's right, that's what we
And then
do.
they're probably not gonna go out and look at the
No.
septic system.
Did you have the appraiser yet? Yes, you did.
It's on Labor Day, actually. it's weird.
Oh, okay.
We had the septic inspected.
Oh,
and the
okay.
guy said the cap was bad.
Okay.
It's in the sidewalk, but they'll probably be bringing sewer through there before too long. So I don't know if it makes sense to go to the expensive.
Where's she at? Where is she buying this house?
It's a street called Walbrecht in Port Charlotte.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what section that's in. So for FHA inspections, once you have an appraisal done, that stays with the property for like 6 months, right?
Yeah, see, I'm not familiar with who can see that. We talked about that
Yeah.
already. I don't know who can see that. I'd have to ask one of the mortgage brokers.
Yeah, that's who I talked to was Toby Lynn.
Oh, you asked Toby? I was gonna
Yeah.
say, I'm gonna call Toby.
Yeah.
6 months? And who has the right to see it? Anybody?
And can you use that?
Well, you have to. That's
You have to,
right.
yeah.
That's my understanding is
Yeah.
once it's got a case number, they give it a case number.
Okay.
and that
It's
case-
attached to the house.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
they can actually, everybody can see that. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, whoever would
Okay.
be involved with,
Right.
yeah. So, that's just something to be aware of, that if you do, say you get an FHA, which is kind of not fair, I think,
It's not
because
fair.
like you said, everybody's got a different opinion.
Sure.
And what happens if the comps change
In less than 6
And they
months?
can.
Yeah, they have.
Every day
Yeah,
they can
have.
change.
Right.
Yeah, they can change all the time.
Well, you could challenge that, right?
I guess.
So the challenge process, when I've done it in the past, is, especially if I had the buyer, is, I find what I think, well, first of all, I ask for a copy of the appraisal, which, that means that the buyer's got to request it from the lender usually, if they don't have it, and then the
Mhm.
lenders might have to get permission from the appraiser.
No.
No, okay. So the lender would have to release, release it to the buyer, the seller, and get it from the seller's agent. And then what I usually do is I go through and I will first look to make sure the information on the subject property is accurate. And then look at the comps that were used, and then I go see if I think the adjustments that were made sense. And then I also try to see if there's any, what I think are better comps. And, I've had several appraisers change the appraisal because they were from out of the area. They didn't know the area, so they were agreeable to that, but I've had just as many refuse to reconsider the appraisal. So there, you can do it, it's just there's a process that you've got to follow, and then, try not to be a jerk about it.
Exactly, because, most people aren't interested, but, well, some are. Some are, but, nobody's perfect. You can miss something. I know for one, I'll look things up on the MLS and I'll search something, and it doesn't work out right for me. The adjustments aren't right, it doesn't look good, so I'll go back and I'll look again. And boy, there'll be something that I didn't see the first time. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah.
Like something else pops in. Where did that come from? I put the same parameters in, and something else will pop up.
All of a sudden,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay,
Mhm.
that happens to me all the time.
It happens to me all the time.
Thank you.
Well,
Good.
Must be
So
me.
you put in sometimes you put in a house number, nothing comes up.
Right,
Then you put in the street, and that comes up with the house number you just put in.
with the same spelling, so then I'll always check the spelling.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And like, what did I miss,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, that happens to me too. But,
Okay, good to know it's not just me. Good to know.
but it's always good to, if you know who the appraiser is, if you wanna give them, email them any suggestions you have or information you have, or comps that you might think would be good. Not to necessarily influence them in any way, but just in case we miss something, we're not perfect either. I'll always take another look if you think I did something, that wasn't right.
So if, the lender's really not supposed to be talking to the appraiser, right?
As long as we don't discuss value.
Okay.
Want to discuss how pretty the house is, or whatever.
I had a
you
conversation
can.
with the appraiser on my house when I was selling, and the appraisal came in low, and they were willing to talk to me, and I told them, are you aware that there are 5 lots in this property? Oh, no.
No? Wow.
Well, there's 5 lots.
That's a
big- Okay,
Not just
that's a
one-
problem.
Not just a lot of the
Yeah.
house.
Weren't they on the contract?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So they
it's all
don't-
in there, it was killed and combined with the county, the whole deal. Wow.
So that's one of the reasons we get the contract too, is
Yes.
you look at the lot numbers and be sure it's all the same.
Yeah, so if I was providing the comps to an appraiser, I would just give it to them in a way, but, you know, this might save you some time, or this might just like, this might be of interest for you.
Yeah, don't say use these.
Yeah.
Because then.
I
It's
did
a nice way to.
print up some comps and leave them like on the kitchen
Yeah,
table or
it's
something.
very helpful.
Just-
With a nice check?
Yeah, well, no.
No,
Joe.
Cash. Can't believe it. Look at that
Oh, my
cash. Check.
It'd be a shame if anything happened with his nice
Do you guys have any other questions about appraisals, or how about personal property? How do you handle that? Like when,
It's not in there. No, we don't at all.
but aren't you required to, if it's house is being sold with personal property?
Then it's worth zero.
No value?
No
No
value.
That's all separate.
No value. And that's really a good point, because if you're doing contracts with personal property, don't put it in the contract. Put it on a separate rider. Because if it's really nice stuff and it's worth 10, 15,000, then I have to take that off the price there.
Mhm. Right.
You can't, you just can't. Put it on a separate agreement.
Yeah, I'd say put it in a
Very
separate
important.
bill of sale.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even if it's sort of
Absolutely.
luck or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's on the contract, I just say it has zero value.
Yeah.
No one's ever questioned me on it, but if someone looks at it and sees all this beautiful stuff, it
Yeah.
might be a problem.
Right.
They've had cars
Cars?
that were conveyed to the house, and was like, keep this
No.
Keep
off the
that,
contract.
yeah, keep that off the contract, yeah.
Oh, God. Wow.
Yeah,
So-
you know.
If you had
an
said a
estate,
boat,
you know,
I
an
would be
estate, and they're like,
interested.
yeah, we're selling it, the car goes with the property.
Mhm.
And you're like, okay, but we're not gonna put that on the contract.
We had one, last week that the buyer was with another agent. But she was gonna refuse to close because there's an addendum that said it was gonna be sold turnkey furnished.
Mhm.
Well, between January and March, the seller had removed some lanai furniture and some personal effects like the kitchen stuff, everything in the kitchen. But it was in the pictures in the MLS, right? So then, in the MLS, it said the furniture would be negotiable. Well, they put a separate addendum on the contract, but they didn't identify it as like addendum A, and put a date, so they didn't tie it back to the contract. But the buyer was trying to say that everything that was there
In those
in the
pictures.
pictures was there when she wrote the contract in June, which the seller swore it wasn't. So then we got into kind of a discussion about what turnkey furnished means.
That's how I lost my very, very first sale, actually, was the agent listed, the house as turnkey furnished, everything, literally turnkey furnished, everything included, move-in ready.
Yeah,
Those
then
were
they
the
thought
words in
about it and they removed
So then
stuff.
we went into the house and, went under contract, and she said, well, there's a few pieces that we wanna take. And they were like, well, what? And it was like, well, the entire living room set except for one chair, the TV,
Oh my goodness.
the lanai furniture, and the kitchen table. And I was like, no.
There's really, I couldn't find any official definition of turnkey furnished,
Mhm.
but it kind of came down to the seller's word against the buyer's word
Right.
as to what was there when they wrote the contract. And the buyer's agent couldn't really remember, and,
Wouldn't the pictures be of value to indicate?
no, I mean, the MLS, what's in the MLS doesn't necessarily dictate what is contracted, right? So,
Yeah, true.
I mean, if they put turnkey furnished, and they
Mhm.
itemize everything in there, so that's what the agent should have done. That's-
Yeah.
So the
Should've.
buyer, when I'm on the phone with the buyer's agent, and he's trying to get our agent to give up part of their commission to make up for this stuff that she said. And the lady, and the buyer started in the background saying, basically telling me that I didn't know what I was talking about, that the legal definition is blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, so you're a lawyer? And she said, well, don't tell me what I am or not, Buster.
Buster.
I said,
Well, those are fighting words now.
I just said, well, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know what that means, except common practice is. That's not,
Right.
your interpretation is not what common practice is. So I said, you don't have to close, but I said, I think my customer will be expecting to get your $6,000 deposit. And they closed. Yeah, so.
Well, she doesn't like you now.
We had another one, too, where they did something similar. It actually listed in the MLS with electric fireplace, like as just furnished with electric fireplace in the description.
Uh-huh.
And then they tried to exclude it in the contract. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I mean, my buyers didn't really care that much, except that like, they're like, good, this is less furniture that we have to buy. Because it was also like the entertainment center or whatever. And we went around in circles to the point where the agent was like, well, you could buy them a fireplace. And I was like, you could buy them a fireplace. You're the one who wrote the MLS description. You know?
Yeah, but really at the end of the day, that doesn't.
Right,
description's
yeah,
not gonna
so we ended up,
dictate it.
like I said, the buyers weren't that concerned about it, they were just annoyed in general with the seller's agent, but, they ended up actually leaving the fireplace after all of that anyways. They told me that they could buy it for like $1,500, and they were like, no, and then they ended up leaving it behind anyways.
Yeah, so what I would say, I agree with Nancy, you shouldn't put it in the contract, because
Yeah.
it just create a problem for financing purposes, but if you're gonna sell a house, then it should be itemized as to what's going with the house, if it's other than what is on the contract. And pictures, it's never a bad idea to take pictures, and then attach that to the bill of sale. It should be part of that, it's like a separate contract.
Yeah.
And that's what the lady said. She said, well, the agent should have done such and such. And I said, yeah, I agree. You and your agent should have had that conversation and submitted that, you know, as part of the contract. So.
She now likes you even less, right?
Main popularity contest.
Yeah. Well,
Now
that's,
you just
we
point
learned our
things
lesson
out.
from those two, and now anytime somebody says they're selling furnished, I take a list at listing, you know, at the listing appointment of anything that's going with it, and I also, Penny had taught us to take a picture of the serial number inside of the
Yeah.
appliances to make sure that they don't change out appliances.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not,
too.
if they're high end, yeah.
Yeah. Right, well, yeah, in
Sounds like
general, but you know, you don't wanna end up, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, you don't wanna end up with something, you know, not working or lower grade
Yeah.
on final walkthrough and be the one who didn't pay attention that it was Kenmore and now it's, you know, something
Roper.
else, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen people do that where they'll take that refrigerator from the garage.
Oh,
Throw it in
see
there,
that?
yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's just mean.
Do you guys have any other questions for Nancy?
No, sir.
Well, my cards are here, feel free to call me if you ever even just have a question.
Yeah.
I'm happy to help you if I can.
Thank
Well,
you
I
so
appreciate
much.
you
you.
stopping by.
Good luck, everybody.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Jim.
But, talking about, so Melissa did see that where did she say that was, Cameron?
Page 10 or section 10?
She said what?
Page
Section
10.
10, page 10.
What?
Closing documents, let's see, I think this is where she said. Yeah, seller shall provide buyer with paid receipts for all work done on the property pursuant to this contract. So, I think that's a weird place for it to be, but that's where it is. You know, another situation we ran into, and I hope you guys are okay with these kind of different scenario things, because I think you learn, I learn more from situations. We
Yes.
had a case the other day where Maggie's got a seller out in Arcadia who bought the property and didn't have they paid cash, they didn't have a survey done when they bought the property. And as they were walking out of closing, the survey was included for closing documents, which didn't have the driveway on it that is now there. And the driveway is on the neighbor's property. So we've been going back and forth figuring out what to do now, because the guy wants to sell it, but he doesn't wanna stir the pot, I guess, on this whole driveway thing, but you gotta disclose that the driveway's not.
How
on
long has the
property.
driveway been in the ground?
Honestly, I'm not sure. It's been there for a couple of years now, so.
Oh, just a couple of years.
Yeah, so that's just another example of people that don't like to spend money all the time on, stuff when they're buying sometimes, especially if they're buying cash. But like, here this guy could have spent $400 or $500 on a survey, and maybe, and actually, I would probably make the case that the title company might be culpable because they had the survey and didn't provide it to them, prior to closing. So that's what we're suggesting, is to go back to the title company and see if, they can make some kind of a claim on the title policy. But, I don't know if Brett's got that in here, to be honest with you. But that's an example of something that if your customer doesn't wanna get title insurance, that's crazy.
It's like not having insurance on your house because you paid cash.
Yeah, so you should definitely, I would definitely put them in front of a title person if they were buying something with me and didn't want to get title insurance, because the title person can explain to them all
Why they need
the
it.
downside to that.
That same with my mom, she bought a house up over on Abscott Street about 5 years ago. And, the title company did not catch that there was a home equity loan open. And so Bank of America, who had initially held the loan, went and sued the original owner, then the previous owner, and then my mom.
Wow.
For the home equity loan. So they had to go back and prove with the title company that they didn't catch it.
Right.
So they, their insurance had to pick up the cost of the attorney and getting all that settled, because the original owner was deceased.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of
Wow.
something that, that stuff like that comes up, that if you don't have title insurance,
Yeah.
they can foreclose on you, because, there's a loan out there. Just trying to. So I was gonna try to get Toby in today to talk about, to be here kinda like Nancy as a guest, to address the finance part of the contracts. So you guys think that's a good idea to
Yeah.
bring people like that in?
Sure.
For sure.
Yes.
Okay, so I thought I'd get Toby in. I think the next class we're gonna do is probably gonna be in the evening, to see if we can get some people that are working other jobs, the ability to get in here. So I was planning on having a mortgage person, maybe a title person, to come in and talk about, more specifically about the closing process and some of the costs that are involved in that. Maybe an insurance person. So you guys,
I think that's a
I
great idea.
think tying them back to the contract makes more sense than just.
It makes a lot of real sense.
Okay, right.
You think evenings are better than mornings, say, for example?
Well, we're trying to get away from the mornings, because we're trying to get people into the lead generation habit.
Well, yeah, but not 5 days a week, so one day we could be training.
No, that's 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, the generate
That's
your
literally
leads.
what they say in MREA.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I spent a long time
It's actually, I believe
lead
it's actually
generating.
6 days a week they say to be lead
Yes,
generating.
for
Okay,
sure.
now you're gonna do
I'm pretty sure I don't take a
Not
break,
everybody's
but-
available from 8 to 10, that's why one day a
But that's
week
the
would be all
best
right to
time.
do this, and then go 10 to 12 for lead generating.
Well, what we're doing is most of the trainings are recorded now, so that people can access them later. We're also trying to advertise them ahead, so people have questions that they think of ahead of time, they can ask them then too. So we're trying to get everything set up so that we'll know about stuff at least a month ahead.
On YouTube.
Yeah, it'll be on
Okay.
YouTube, on Facebook.
Take it
Zoom
under
It's
calls.
really
advisement.
beneficial,
I
so
will.
thank
I will
you
take it
so
under
much.
advisement.
I don't know
No,
if
we'll
anyone's
take
told
it.
you that yet, but
So-
I greatly appreciate it.
I will.
You guys all are familiar with these addendums, right? I mean, maybe not intimately,
We went
but
over those last time.
if you're adding an addendum to the contract, you should be checking this box off, right?
Right.
You guys know that, because that
Yeah.
means
remember
it's
the
part of the
last.
contract. That's where the guy that did the furnished turnkey addendum, there was no indication it was here. It didn't identify itself as an addendum to any specific contract, so I don't even know if it was a valid document. I think it was worth what was written on personally. But,
So that would have been the sale of buyer's property?
Because I came in to speak with David. And he
no,
was
the
just-
sale of buyer's, the sale of
Sat
buyer's
down.
property is gonna be when the purchase is gonna be contingent on the sale of another,
Oh, okay.
of their.
So there's nothing in here for a,
I would just do a bill of sale. I would just do a bill of sale. I wouldn't even make it part of the contract. It would just be a separate agreement. I mean, a lot of agents like to use the addendums and then they just don't send them to the financing company. That makes me very nervous because if something goes south on that loan and they start investigating it, you could end up, I think somebody could consider that mortgage fraud if you try to hide something from the mortgage company. So I'm not a fan of that.
Right.
It's Terrence.
When you have a seller's disclosure, that's an other, you wanna put it in? When you-
Seller's disclosure actually is not really an addendum to the contract, it's just the seller's disclosure of what the property
Right.
condition is, really. And it's not required, which is, I think, weird, that the sellers aren't required to give it.
Right. But I wrote one up today, for some buyers that, the listing agent said that it was required to have them sign it.
Seller's disclosure?
Yeah.
Which office were they from?
This was, from Caldwell.
Okay.
I have,
Yeah,
some
that's just an
investors.
office policy.
yeah.
Yeah, and, well, but the thing is, you know, so it's pretty much, it comes attached with the offer. So the way I wrote it in there was I did, it was an HOA, so I did HOA, and I also did one for other, and I did seller's disclosure, just showing
Okay.
that it's attached.
Like
So I
down
was-
here?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I mean, it's just that it's, I mean, it would probably be interesting to find out what would happen if you did that and then you found out they didn't disclose something they're supposed
Yeah.
to disclose. And then, I don't know if it would make any difference, the fact that you attached it versus not attaching it, but I think it would, it kind of does memorialize the fact that it was, you
It
know,
was in there.
in there. So, yeah, it's probably not a bad idea.
yeah, I'm like, I tippy toe over everything, trying to CYA.
You know, some of these ones, we've talked about this before too, like pre-closing and post-closing, that's where, like, I think you're better off trying to extend a closing or move a closing. I'd rather move the closing date to a date that would work for both parties, that wouldn't require either of those things, than to get into those pre and post-closing occupancies, because you just don't know what could happen, you know. You're being the nice guy, so you're letting them store some stuff in the garage and somebody falls and slips. You know, so, yeah, we've had all these things.
Yeah, I
happen,
remember
so-
all this.
Or somebody stays after closing and then,
They don't leave.
yeah, then, right, yeah, so they're all real world situations, that's why they have a lot of these forms, right? But I would try to avoid them if I can. You know, we are starting to see a lot of that sale of buyer's property.
Yeah.
So that can be a little bit tricky, especially if your seller is in a position where they've got to be out by a certain date. You know, so that's also something else that needs a lot of consideration before you get into that. I mean, if you get, but I think it is a good idea to use the appraisal contingency on all conventional loans and even cash deals if you want to do that. The FHA, VA financing is one that's required if you're doing that financing. And we have seen a few seller financing deals here lately. You can use that addendum, but really at the end of the day, the title company or the attorney's going to have to draw up a mortgage and a deed. And if you're going to get into seller financing, you know, there's certain things you need to discuss with the two parties, is like the interest rate, how much the down payment gonna be, how are the loan payments gonna be calculated, like over what amortization period. So if you need help with that, let me know. Association, you know, there are some condo associations that actually have homeowners associations in addition to the condos. Like, I think Lamonte's that way, where each building has its own association, but then there's a master association.
They're so big, they would have to, I would think.
Yeah. So I think Riverwood's like that too. I think each neighborhood has their own association.
Yeah, it's just
and
big.
Southwood and
Yeah.
Venice Golf and Country are also like that.
Okay. So what I always tell, try to encourage the agents to do, if you're taking a listing in a condo or a house in a homeowner association, or especially one in both, try to get all the documents from the seller right up front. Too many agents make the mistake, or they just don't get them, and then all of a sudden you get an offer, and then they're scrambling to get everything at the last minute. And, you know, the buyer has 3 days to inspect those documents. So if you drag your feet getting them to them, you just add more time on for the buyer to potentially cancel the contract, and your seller's kind of left hanging. So that's just something to really kind of be conscious of.
Financing and the appraisal, I always check.
Yeah, so Tony was saying, make sure I got this right. So Tony, that's a good point what Tony's making about the deposit.
It was, yeah.
You know, we've run into too many deals where people are putting $500 or $1,000 down, and then they don't care. You know, they'll walk away from $500 or $1,000.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody will, but those deals are much more likely to die because there's not as much at risk. So, I mean, if they don't have it right up front, you can always do something like, you know, they make an additional deposit, like at the end of the inspection period or something like that. You can,
Right.
I mean, we do that with commercial deals all the time. Like, we'll have benchmarks in the deal where, okay, we get 30 days, you know, you're gonna put another $5,000 in, and 60 days another 5, and so on and so forth. So there's nothing wrong with you doing that here, that if they can only give you $500,000 today, you know, say that they'll put in, especially if you're on the seller side, you know, say, okay, but in 10 days I want another $2,000 or whatever the case may be. Like Tony said, even if they're doing FHA and all, they might not have to put all that much down on the house if they're getting a high enough loan amount, but they'll just get a credit at closing instead of having to bring more money to the table. And then with the inspections, I was mistaken. I thought what Tony was doing was having the appraisal ordered or done before the inspection. So sometimes I kind of think on an FHA and VA deal, if you think there's going to be issues with the FHA or VA appraisal because of the condition of the property, I'm thinking it's almost makes more sense to have the appraisal done first and then have the inspection done. Because why waste your money on the inspection if the appraisal is going to be an issue? John?
In that situation that I'd mentioned before, where I had, the buyer wanted an appraisal on a cash deal, and the seller said, all right, but if it comes in high, we're gonna ask for more money.
Yeah.
The way I managed to negotiate out of that situation was, we're gonna take the appraisal out of the contract, and I just said to the buyer, make sure the appraisal happens before the end of the inspection period.
Yeah.
So they got their appraiser, and if it didn't appraise the way they liked, they still had the inspection period to back out. So that's a good reason to have the appraisal done up front, because you can back out.
Did it work out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
After it went through.
So yeah, if you work, has anybody tried using Keller Mortgage yet?
No.
No.
Has it worked out for you?
Yeah, they were great. I mean,
So they are ordering the appraisal right up front. And if the deal doesn't go through, the buyer's not on the hook for it. So it's just something to think about.
I actually had my buyer, you know, I just sent her through the app. She applied. I left the appointment with them, and I was driving home, and I got a phone call from Keller Mortgage. Hi, I'm your loan rep, and I'm going to be working this deal with you. It was like Disneyland. You know,
Really?
Yeah, they were bending over backwards.
So when they first came out, it was all online, right? You had to start everything online. You couldn't talk to anybody until you submit your stuff. So they've changed that now. So like if you have a loan officer you've worked with that you like, you can go directly to that
Directly
loan
to them.
officer. They also have I think a 1-800 number or something now too that you can call if you'd rather talk to somebody before you start something online. But the experience has been that they're giving people $1,000 towards closing costs. And I think on average, they're saving people somewhere between $3,000 to $5,000 just because the terms are more favorable than what people can get elsewhere. Because they're not charging like origination fees and stuff like that. And they're not advertising like Rocket Mortgage does, so they're not spending all that money on the TV. And it's not a profit center for Keller Williams either. So they're really just trying to kind of just cover the cost.
And they'll only do that with none of the fees if it comes from one of us.
Right, and it's gotta be over 150,000, I think.
Right. 150,000.
So, yeah, so you can have a situation where it could be your buyer, but also if you have a listing and another agent brings a buyer to the table, that you can share Keller Mortgage with them too, but it's gotta be a transaction that Keller Williams agents involved in.
And is it always through your app?
Well, no, they actually have an 800 number now.
Yeah.
But, the best, I think,
No,
yeah,
I
it's the best way to
really-
get
yeah.
started on it,
It's
yeah.
just not good.
So if you're not offering that as an option, I mean, what they're afraid, what Keller Williams is afraid of is people are gonna start finding out they could have gotten a free mortgage.
Getting mad about it.
Yeah.
And we didn't tell them about it,
That's
so we're gonna
true.
end up getting, so part of that disclosure is gonna be about a Keller Mortgage. And then the next thing that's coming down the pike is the insurance marketplace, where your customers will be able to shop on your app for insurance. And then they're starting the iBuyer program, which is starting like 10 or 12 market centers.
Can you
Closest one to us.
describe that a little bit more, because even
The
when I was
iBuyer?
reading up on it, I did not quite understand what was going on.
So the iBuyers, you know how Zillow's doing, Zillow, I'll make an offer on your house now. It's the same thing. Like, you could walk into a listing appointment and you have to get certified. There's a certification process to be an iBuyer agent. At least now there is. I don't know if that'll last long term. But you'll be in a position where you could make them an offer on their house instead of listing it. So, and I think if you go through that program, my understanding is like if they end up buying the house through Keller Williams' iBuyer program, that you'll get paid 1% on that transaction, but then you'll get the listing to resell the property for a full commission. So it's kind of like just another tool in your belt, so that we can keep people on our app instead of going to Zillow and Redfin and everybody else out there. And then they're going to add a property management feature to it as well, so you'll be able to, offer it to tenants or landlords and stuff like that. But anyway, they're just trying to make it a full experience for people in real estate, so that they're using your tool and your stuff, and you're in front of them instead of going off and wandering out in the woods someplace. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So, you guys have is there anything we didn't cover today
Yes,
that you were
Jim,
hoping to?
you did not cover page 13. I was waiting to ask you this question.
We're only on 10.
No, I went all the way to the end, except you skipped page 13.
Okay.
Buyer's address for purposes of notice. Now, when you go to close out a listing in the MLS, they say, well, where is the buyer from? What's their zip code? And everybody's putting the zip code of the property they bought. That's not really accurate. What they want to know is, where's the buyer
Came
from?
Yeah, yeah.
So I never see this filled out.
I don't fill it
And I
out.
never insist on filling it
Well,
out,
I had-
but should we?
I don't fill it out. The title company's gonna,
They do that?
I mean, I don't wanna give out somebody's information to
Okay.
like competing brokers.
Right, and I had a lot listing, and the buyer's agent refused to give me anything but a name. No telephone number, no email address, no address, nothing. And it was like pulling teeth for the title
But
company.
you didn't need that, right?
Right, but I was gonna just put it on the forms because the title company asked me, and I was like, I have no idea. She said they weren't that agent didn't wanna share
But
any of that information, but eventually did.
Well,
That's a title company's fault.
Yeah.
You know what, it
Blame it on the
was,
title company.
right,
I'm
right,
excited.
but I just
My
wanted
ugly,
to get
I
that.
can't paint at all.
Yeah, I would-
So glad
I'd
that
like
we
a
all
title
do the same
company.
thing, so I can.
Well,
start
same
to
thing
see
with a
all
lot of
my-
the stuff in these contracts, like FERPA. Somebody starts talking to me about FERPA, I'm like, shoot, talk to your attorney, talk to your solicitor,
Yeah.
talk to the
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
title company.
I don't speak for them.
Yeah, I don't wanna know anything about
I
FERPA.
do those all the time.
Other than.
Yeah, she did a different
exists.
one, but yeah, she did one, it was like for kids and I was when she was too little.
That's
Great.
awesome.
Is there anything else, you guys? I know this was a little bit less, structured.
Think you covered it?
I liked it, though.
All very well?
I liked it too,
Mm-hmm.
because it gave experiences
Yeah, I
for
remember
each
the,
different segment.
I remember the day I passed my
I got a
license
question.
test, I came to this
On the
class.
section right down there
27.
where it's contract not
And,
recorded.
right, we went strictly through all that stuff.
I've had some clients go,
I remember that.
what's this, why can't this be recorded? You know, they look at that suspiciously, and I go, well, it's really not a problem, it's just the way that, you know, that it's handled in Florida in general, and it's boilerplate, but I can't really speak to why the reason is that's in there.
What?
Well, I think the reason why it's in there is probably because people were starting to do that, and it was creating a problem, because it's probably easy to record it, but what happens if they don't unrecord it?
Right.
When it disappears?
Goes out.
Yeah,
The recording.
so I would imagine it created some problems for title people to get things cleaned up. I mean, I've never run into that as being a problem, to be honest with you. I mean, do you bring that to people's attention?
Well, some kind of go, you know, page by page through a contract with people so that they feel comfortable with it, and if you get one of those, what is it, C types? That,
Yeah.
It's like, what about that?
Yeah.
We send them to you, John, if we get a C-type.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that they're not recordable, because it could probably get to be a mess if people started recording contracts on property. That would-
So the deed is recorded, that's enough.
Yeah.
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 One last thing, Jim, that sometimes gets a little confusing is the effective date, when somebody forgets
Oh,
to
great
sign
point.
something and you
Great
gotta send
point.
it back.
Yeah, that's a great point, Linda. I meant to cover that, so. Okay. So on page 1 here,
Yeah?
right down here where it says time for acceptance of the offer, if you guys don't hit that date or that time, then the whole contract's invalid. So you need to, in the old days, what it used to say was if the contract wasn't executed by that thing, the buyer had the right to withdraw the offer or something like that. Now what it says is that the offer shall be deemed withdrawn and the deposit, if any, so, we lost the deal over this because, again, I learned, you know, it's another lesson learned unexpectedly. We had an agent that had a buyer on 2 lots out in their ranchettes, and I think the contract was for like, I don't know, $25,000 or $30,000 for the 2 lots, which is what it said in the MLS, what the contract said, and all the documentation, everything that was in the file referenced the 2 contracts. The seller had a change of heart. I think what happened was either the agent messed up and wrote up the paperwork for the 2 lots and the seller didn't realize that, or the seller, somewhere that I think there was some miscommunication between the seller and the buyer, or it's the seller and their agent. But the seller had a change of heart. She didn't want to sell, she wanted to close. So they went to an attorney, Roger Miller, over at the FAR firm, and he was the one that pointed out that because everything didn't get executed by the time, the date on that form,
She didn't have to
it was
sell
an
it.
invalid contract.
Yeah.
Now, I talked to an attorney, and he said because of the behavior of both parties from the point they went into contract through to working up towards closing, you can make a case that they behaved in a manner in which they knew that what the deal was, but what, first $30,000, it wasn't worth getting attorneys involved and trying to enforce the contract. So
I have a situation right now where the contract's been executed for a month and a half, coming close to closing. The buyer's agent is saying my seller didn't initial on the very last page where all the signatures are.
oh, don't you hate that?
And they're bothering me for those initials.
Yes.
And of course, my seller wants to initial using DocuSign, but I don't want to, or eSign, I don't want to do that because it'll automatically date it. And
Right.
it would start all the periods
Changes the
again, I
effective
think.
date, yeah.
So what you could do is you can just save it as a PDF and then reload it into .loop as a PDF and then add an initial for that one box.
Yeah, I'm having them, you know, I'm having them print out a copy, initial it by hand, and send
Yeah.
it back to me.
Well, you could do the same thing with electronic signature by adding.
Well, the only thing is then it'll give me today's date as it'll timestamp it
Yeah, and timestamps when it was signed.
a month and a half
Oh,
after
yeah.
the contract already started. That's what I'm
Oh,
afraid
month
of.
and a half.
Yeah,
That's
that's
big
true.
time.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like,
Stupid computers, they screwed everything up.
So I have a question on this. I had the seller for a lot. She, signed wherever she was supposed to sign, initial where she was supposed to sign. The buyer initialed everywhere and did not sign it.
They didn't sign the contract?
No.
Yeah,
Then you have to send it back and it's
Oh
not
my
effective
God.
until then.
And this one tiny little lot has gone back and forth so many times.
Those are the worst ones.
Yeah.
And how could this happen? I feel like I'm in the twilight zone with it.
So the other thing I've had people question is like, when you talk about timeframes ending, whether it's inspection timeframe, financing, closing
Yeah.
date, you know, when is that 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon? And the only place in the contract that it calls for a specific time is when you talk about a period that ends on a weekend or national holiday, then everything rolls over to the next business day until 5 o'clock. So as far as I know, everything goes till midnight, except in that particular case. So what I usually do is, if I want an answer, say well, that property I'm buying, I wanted them to answer me before the weekend because they're gonna do an open house, right? So I specifically put on here that I want an answer on Friday, no later than 4 o'clock. Because then,
They couldn't do their.
yeah, they won't touch it. Yeah, so that's all, I think that's always a good idea. If something's time sensitive, to put a time. And the reason why I put like 5 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock instead of 5, is because I want time to kind of fix things. If I don't get the answer I want by 4 o'clock, you know, I want time to work on it before everybody goes home. The other thing, as far as dates and everything go, I try to avoid Mondays and Fridays for closings anymore. I just think if there's gonna be a delay in something getting shipped out or received, it's gonna more than likely happen on a Monday or Friday, and you're stuck if it doesn't happen for the weekend. And then the other thing I try to avoid is I don't really like to go right up to the end of the month on closings anymore, because there's just been way
It's
too
too much.
many,
Yeah.
too many instances where things haven't gotten done in time. So, there are just a few things I like to do. Talked about occupancy and possession. If there's a tenant in the house, which is not supposed, you know, is not gonna stay, again, I would put in here that the tenant's to be out of the house at least 5 days before closing or something like that. I treat them just like that old car in the driveway or the boat in the backyard. I want them gone before, so I can do that walkthrough and have time to take care of stuff.
Have you ever run into a situation, because fortunately it hasn't been any of the deals that I've done, but I know that there are squatters, you know, people that are renting and then they just stop paying rent and they're hanging out and they haven't been evicted yet.
For a house you're trying to sell?
Yeah, and, you know, there's a sale going on, so there's a tenant in there, and then it comes down to the closing date and the tenant isn't needed.
I don't think I've seen, not that I recall seeing that, but you know, you see all the time, like, people are trying to sell a house with a tenant in it that's not gonna stay, and they make it like live in hell to show the property.
Yep, yeah,
So
and they keep it a mess.
yeah,
Mhm.
they make it, yeah. But I
Well,
haven't
they
seen
don't
that
want
one, I'm
the
sure it's
show.
happened.
Yeah.
I'm sure it has.
Yeah.
But that's why I would put in there that the people need to be out 5 days prior to closing, because I don't wanna deal with that. Or my customer gonna deal with it. And I can't emphasize enough, like a lot of this stuff, you need to be talking to the lender. That's why you need to be dealing with somebody you can get a hold of. We had an agent that their buyer was using something called Loan Depot. I don't ever even heard of it before. It was online. They were trying to get, actually I think it was my daughter. They were trying to get some information. No, my daughter was the agent. So she was trying to get information from this company and nobody would respond to her. It was just the craziest thing. And, yeah, it was tough. So, if your buyer comes to you with a pre-approval from Rocket Mortgage or any of those online things, or even one of the big banks like Bank of America, or like an out-of-town big bank, or even out-of-town small bank, really, I would definitely get them in touch with somebody local, and I would also throw them in front of Keller Mortgage, because if they can save some money on that, why not? But I want to be able to, like Tom Weeks would say, he wants to be able to walk in and be able to reach across the desk and strangle somebody if he has to. And same thing with title work. Like if you got an agent, especially an agent from out of the area, that wants to use a title company, like the house my wife and I were buying up in Ellington. The guy, one of the sons, is from the East Coast. So he wants to use a friend of his over there as the title company. I offered to pay for title because I wanted to have control over it. So I put Suncoast One down. They want to use their lady because she's probably cutting on my break or something, I don't know. So I wasn't comfortable with that, primarily because I couldn't even find her on the internet. I think she's kind of new, so it made me nervous that I might be sending money over to some lady over on the East Coast that I don't even know, or from Adam. So I called Kevin Graham at Suncoast One. I asked him what he thought, and he said, yeah, I can't even find her. I've had a hard time trying to find her anywhere. So I just told them, I said, look, I'm putting the money over at Suncoast One, and then, you know, we'll just transfer it to you. And then, so now Suncoast One's actually doing the closing at their office, instead of having to worry about some mobile closer or something. So I think if you're in doubt about the people that are going to be the closing agents, you can always use somebody local to hold your money. Suncoast One will do it for our agents all day long. But if you have somebody else you work with, just ask them. They'll probably be willing to hold the money for you. And they can always transfer it over there. So don't be bullied into like doing stuff you're not comfortable with, because
Isn't it state law that we have to put the title company down there who's gonna hold the escrow?
yeah. So like in my
Yeah,
case,
fill
I put Suncoast One.
And even if the seller is asking the buyer to pay title, you can still put Suncoast One. If they wanna change it, they can change it.
Well, like they changed it from buyer to pay to seller to pay. I forget what we did about this. But yeah, I would just put wherever I'm gonna put the money there. Because the escrow agent's different than a closing agent, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so I would rather have my money someplace where I know people are looking out for my best interest. And again, you should be talking to the lender to find out, you know, it drives me crazy when I see, and I know agents do it all the time because they haven't been burned or the customer, but when you leave that blank,
Which one?
the interest rate especially,
Yeah.
I mean, the other stuff all has fallback positions, right? It's got 30 days, it's got, I even think you should be putting fixed rate on there. I don't really like the, if my customer wants to get an adjustable loan, they can get it, but I'd rather make it so that if they can't get the fixed rate, they can always walk away. But I hate seeing the percentage for the interest rate blank, because then you're leaving it up to prevailing rates. So if something weird happens in the economy, like 9/11, if something like 9/11 happened, I can guarantee you the interest rate's gonna be different after that than it was before. I mean, so there was a time when we were seeing rates like fluctuate a couple of percentage points overnight. So I really think you should be talking to the lenders and getting an idea of what interest rate, you know, they don't have to nail it down to the, 100th percentage point, but if you can at least get it within a quarter or half a percentage point, I think your customer would probably be very happy with you if they don't get stuck with something higher than what they wanted.
Oh, good.
Okay? And I always put 30 years in there. If they want to go shorter than 30 years, they can, but I want to give them the ability to do the 30 if they want to do that. We talked about this. Home warranties, we're supposed to be offering a home warranty on every
And getting them to
every
sign the
customer.
paper.
To have them
Yeah.
sign, accept
That's
or
gonna-
decline.
That's gonna be part of the new paperwork. We're gonna have a form that you have to get your customer to sign off for, same thing with an inspection. So on each deal, if we don't have the ability to send the documentation to the E&O company and there's a claim, that we offer a home warranty, that we have had an inspection performed, or at least encourage them to do it, that we're using a standard form, that's not a problem. And the fourth one is inspection warranty forms.
Insurance?
That's insurance.
No?
Form. Inspection warranty. There's a fourth one. We're gonna have our risk management seminar in October, and the attorneys are coming down from Tampa, which I think anybody that was there last year got a lot out of that. Maybe got a little scared from it, but it's a really good session, so we'll be covering all that then. But anyway, there's four things. The warranty is the one that I see most often. Agents just keep checking that NA box, and they don't get any documentation to show that they provided, an opportunity for the buyer to buy it.
Information.
And then, we'll get stuck with a $5,000 deductible instead of $2,500 if there's an E&O claim. So I would, some agents are starting to have their initials, like buyers, their customers' initial contracts. I'll find out from the E&O company if that's gonna be acceptable as evidence that we offered it, but I'd rather see, we're gonna have a separate form that we'll probably be using. The special assessments only apply to public entities, public bodies. It doesn't pertain to homeowners association. This doesn't pertain to homeowners association or condo associations. So if you have an issue with the special assessment in a condo or homeowners association, you need to handle that differently than this. There needs to be some kind of an addendum that says, that how that assessment's gonna be handled between the buyer and seller. And you should be able to tell that by looking, all the documentation that you should be getting from the associations should include like minutes of the most recent like meetings over the past year or whatever, financial statements and a budget. And if there's any assessments being discussed, more than likely you'll get them from looking that information over. And you should probably be talking to the association manager, right? So if you guys see anything on there, you guys all know we're supposed to be offering an energy brochure to all our customers, right?
Yes, the brochure.
Which is, I think
And
it's.
lead-based
stupid.
paint.
Well, lead-based paint only if it's pre-1978.
Right.
But energy brochures, you're supposed to be offering that on every deal. I don't understand that either, but. And they, you know, they're supposed to be maintaining the property in the condition it was in at the time that it went under contract. So we just had a situation again where the pool filter stopped working. But the sellers claim it stopped working before they went under contract. So they have a pool service coming out every week and throwing chemicals in there and brushing the
So it looks
stuff
like it's
around.
working.
No, it doesn't. So
No, it doesn't.
But it's just, so I talked to, who was it? We have both sides of that deal, actually. So a buyer's agent came to me and said, hey, this is the situation. The pool is getting dirtier because we're not running the pump. And the buyers, and the seller's agent's saying, you know, that the pump hasn't been working or whatever. So I called up the seller's agent, I said, so what's going on with this house? She said, well, no, they're having it served. I said, if the pump's not running, it's gotta be getting worse, you know? So, but the people didn't have the money to fix it. So the buyer actually sent somebody over to replace the pump before closing. So
Wow.
that's how we got around that one. But, yeah, so, you know, the things we see most often are the grass and the pools. That's the two things that usually people, especially if it's absentee owners, they'll just cut off their pool service and the lawn service. And then, you know, you go over it again. So if you think that might be happening, go over to the house like a week before and check it out. And if that's the case, you gotta bring it up to their attention and see what they plan to do about it. And if they're not gonna do anything about it, I would get estimates for what it's gonna cost to have it taken care of. And then, you know, I put an addendum together to say that this money's gonna be escrowed at closing. You know, of course, it all comes down to how sensitive your buyer is about it. So if they're not worried about it, I guess you don't have to worry about it. But and then if you're on the selling side and you see that that's happening,
Oh, gosh.
you know, I would definitely bring it to the attention of, I wouldn't want to let it go to the last minute and then hope that the buyers don't make an issue out of it. But, so you should be making sure your sellers are aware of that. The other thing is too, I don't know if you've ever run into this, but sometimes people come from other areas where when you close, you have like as long as 30 days to move out of the house.
Isn't that like Georgia?
I think New York might be like that, I'm not sure, but.
I would not like that.
Wisconsin, I heard, is like that, and Georgia, those two
Yeah,
states
so
for
if you
sure.
have people coming from areas like that, they need to know that when they sell the house, they gotta get out of there. All right, so if you're talking to them a week before closing and they haven't started making arrangements to get the crap out, you might wanna have a conversation with them. And they should be leaving the house in reasonably, like broom clean is what I call it.
Broom swept, yeah.
And they shouldn't be leaving a bunch of garbage in the trash, in the garage, and we see that kind of stuff too. All right. Well, if you guys are good, I'm good. So. All right.
Till next time.
Thank you.
So, you guys have any interest in doing a listing class?
Yes.
Yeah.
A
can
listing
do one.
contract class?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Jim,
24 days.
I gotta tell you, I just came back from Ireland. I went to visit a brokerage over there.
Oh, did you go?
Oh, yes, I did.
Yeah, I just said it is.
They don't have